This episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. These days, keeping track of your subscriptions can be near impossible, and nobody wants to pay for things they're not using. Thankfully, there's Rocket Money, the personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. With Rocket Money, you can monitor your spending, build a personal budget, and get help lowering your bills. They even handle the customer service part for you. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in unwanted subscriptions. So stop wasting money on things you aren't using and start growing your savings today when you go to rocketmoney.com/commandzone.
Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Command Zone podcast. Hi!
Hello.
I'm your host, Rachel Weeks, and today I'm joined by a special guest. You know him, you love him. It's Murph!
Hello. It's me. We're here to talk about cool Jumpstart commanders.
Yeah, we've already done the Commanders episode for Foundations, but they've broken this set into a couple of different boxes, and there's a lot of legendary creatures. So we wanted to do a second episode to make sure that we've covered as many of the commanders that you're interested in as possible. We're going to go through a few of the ones that are in the set, not all of them, just the ones that we think are going to be the most popular or the most fun or most interesting or difficult to build. We'll talk about the cards that go in the 99 when you're building, and it's Foundations, so we're going to take things a little bit slow. We're going to try not to use as much jargon. We're going to explain things a little bit more than we normally would because it's a new set designed for new players. So sorry if we're moving a little slower than normal, but
Put us on 1.25 or 1.5x
yeah,
speed.
crank us up. We'll be a little.
That will be at 2x speed if they put us at 1.5.
If you want to pick up any of the cards that we talk about in this episode today, go to cardkingdom.com/command. Card Kingdom has a huge selection of singles, sealed product. Pick up some Foundations Jumpstart, or any of the cards that you can find in those boxes. We love Card Kingdom because they have a huge selection of cards. Plus, we know that they have a knowledgeable team that when they're packing up those bags, they know Magic cards, they know exactly what cards you're looking for in the right printing, in the right condition, and they're going to get it to you safely in a little plastic box with a little packing peanut, all safe and packaged up. We trust Card Kingdom to shop for our Magic cards, and you know we love Magic cards. Again, cardkingdom.com/command.
And also, a great way to support the show is by using ULTRAPRO products. They have awesome playmats, deck boxes, sleeves, all sorts of stuff. They've got the license to put any of the cool Magic art onto their products. So whatever the most recent set is, you can find some of that art that exists on ULTRAPRO products.
Yeah, there's a lot of new Foundation stuff.
Yeah.
It's got a very sort of like 90s Dixie Cup style.
Perfect. Foundations, back to the basics, back to the 90s when Magic all started.
Exactly. Throwback.
And if you go to ultrapro.com/command, that's the best place to go to get all those ULTRAPRO products. You can find them at your local game store. But if you go to the website, you can oftentimes find a bunch of flash sales. They got a newsletter you can sign up for. Make sure you're available to pick up awesome stuff whenever it becomes available. Again, ultrapro.com/command.
Yeah, tell them that we sent you. And speaking of ULTRAPRO, we've got a cool new Kickstarter going right now. We've got a deck box from ULTRAPRO. This may look familiar to some of our patrons. We did a similar deck box not too long ago, but it was our most popular Kickstarter, so we decided to run it back. It's got a shiny inside with our logo. It can fit 2 double-sleeved Commander decks in here, plus all the tokens and dice that you need to play Commander these days.
Thank goodness. I want to bring at least 2 Commander decks to everywhere that I go to. Yeah.
Yeah, this little section pulls out and it's got a little box for dice and tokens and that kind of thing.
Perfect.
It's really high quality. It's great to, if you have multiples of these, you can stack them in a bag right on top of each other. You don't have a bunch of deck boxes rattle around loose in there. Plus, it's ULTRAPRO, so you know it's high quality, will last forever. If you picked up the last one and you want a second one, get it. If you weren't around the last time we did this Kickstarter, here's a new one with a brand new orange logo on the front.
Command Zone orange.
This is the only place you can get it.
Perfect.
So go to our Kickstarter right now. There's a link in the show notes to pick those up. All of our supporters are welcome to buy it. No,
You're awesome.
You're the best.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Showing off your fandom. But what the transition I was attempting to make
That was
is
attempting to be a transition.
Hang on.
Oof.
When you buy this deck box, you're supporting the show. And the other people who support the show are our patrons.
There we go. Okay.
Ta-da!
Okay. I get it.
That's a transition.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
That was the transition I was trying to do. And we shout out one lucky patron every single podcast episode. And this one is dedicated to Lyle Jones. Lyle, you rock.
Thanks, Lyle.
All right, let's get into it. We are talking about commanders from Foundations Jumpstart. Again, we're taking it easy. We're taking it slow. Some of these are like pretty simple, basic commanders, so we want to explain them in a way that's palatable to people that are new to Commander, but some of them are really mechanically interesting. So there's a lot for advanced players as well in this episode. Let's get into it, starting with Aphelia, Viper Whisperer.
Yeah, this one's 1 and a black for a legendary creature, Gorgon Assassin. It's got Death Touch. Whenever it attacks, you may pay 1 and a hybrid black or green, so you can pay either black or green into that for a total of 2 mana. If you do create a 1/1 black snake creature token with Death Touch, it has a second ability where you can pay 4 and a black until end of turn. Whenever 1 or more Gorgons and or snakes you control deal combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life, rounded up. And it's a 1/3. I don't know if I said that. It's a 1/3.
With Death Touch.
Yeah.
Okay, so she is a snaky lady. Love that.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about her color identity because this is a green and a black commander because she's got a green and a black mana symbol in her rules text. So that means you can put green cards and black cards into this deck. It's an aggressive deck. The plan is to put a lot of snakes, a lot of Gorgons into the deck and deal damage to your opponents, having their life total over and over and over again, eventually draining them out. You get it? It's like a poisonous bite.
Ooh.
Like when
nice,
the snakes hit you, it's poisonous. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. Also cool art. All of these have very cool.
Yeah, they did like an anime treatment on all of the legends that are in Jumpstart Foundations, and they're pretty fun.
Yeah, I love them a lot.
All right, the first thing we got to talk about, of course, is the snakes of it all.
Yeah,
the snakes and the Gorgons, which have, of course, snakes for hair.
You probably want to put snakes in this deck, considering she says that you probably want snakes on the text. So some good snakes are things like Orin Frostfang, where whenever your snakes will deal damage, then you can start drawing cards, keeps your engine going.
I really like Tower Winder. It's one that came out in Thunder Junction Commander. It just enters. It's a 2-mana reach Death Touch creature. When it enters, it gets you a command tower. It's a little Death Toucher. It draws you a card. It fixes your mana. It does a lot for just being 2 mana.
Yeah. It gets you something you want and leaves a body very relevant for your commander. You can put things like Vizier of the Menagerie in. That's the look at the top card of your deck. If it's a creature card, you can play it.
Yeah, that's a great card advantage, especially if you're playing a lot of snakes, which tend to be pretty low mana value and just are like 1 mana 1/1s with Death Touch.
Yeah, one thing I did want to note is that if you look at the type line of this card, it used to say Naga Cleric. So if you have any old printings of that,
No longer
Naga, now Snake. So keep an eye out for cards that say Naga on them. They are now errata to Snake.
Good point. We wanted to talk about some ways that you can make snake tokens. I wanted to bring up an oldie, Pharika, God of Affliction.
What a goodie.
I love this card. It's 1 in black and a green for a legendary enchantment creature god. It's got indestructible. As long as your devotion to black and green is less than 7, Pharika is a creature, but she's got an activated ability that says black-green, exile target creature card from a graveyard. Its owner puts a 1/1 black and green snake enchantment creature token with Death Touch onto the battlefield. So if you're trading off your little snake tokens, you can exile them and get a new snake right to the battlefield. You can also eat your opponent's creatures out of their graveyard, but of course,
Then
you're
they get
giving
snake.
them the snake.
Which you probably don't want. You can't
I don't
do
think
it.
that's the dream.
My dream is to make a Pharika deck where all I do is give tokens
Give
to
them
other
snakes.
people.
As
There
a
you go.
Feldergriff player, yes.
Perfect. Pharika's actually Feldergriff in disguise.
There's also things like Ophiomancer, which makes a snake every turn. Or you can make a ton of snake tokens if you're a little less worried about the Death Touch and use some like old token makers. They were a lot more into snakes back then.
Oh, yeah. An oldie but a goodie. Snake Basket's one of my favorites. That's a 4-mana artifact where you can pay X, which is any amount of mana that you want, sacrifice it, put X 1/1 green snake creature tokens, used to say Cobra, but now they're snakes. Place ability only if you're allowed to play a sorcery. So you cannot do it at instant speed. You have to do it during your turn, pay whatever mana into it, and make potentially lots and lots of snakes if you're good at ramping.
You don't want to put all your snakes in one basket. Except this basket, because it's already full of snakes.
I really do.
If you don't like keeping your snakes in a basket and you'd prefer a pit, you can also play Snake Pit. 3 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent plays a blue or black spell, you may make a 1/1 green snake creature token.
Can I not have a snake pit and also not have a snake basket? I don't think I want to own either of those, I'll be perfectly honest.
No snake containers.
Nope. No containers of snakes for me, please.
No snake duffel bags.
Yeah.
Snake Longaburger. I guess we already have talked about baskets.
Yeah. No, I'm good. Anyway.
There's some very cool snake typal cards if you want to go fully down the snake route, which there's more snakes than there are gorgons, so I would imagine this is a mostly snake deck. You could play cool stuff like Seshiro the Anointed.
Yeah, that buffs your snakes, and whenever a snake you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card, similar to the Oran Frostfang. Yeah. Very neat little guy. Well, 6 mana, I don't know if it's little, but...
It's a snake. It draws you cards. You gotta play it.
Exactly. Now we're getting it.
You can also play Shapeshifters if you're into that. You could put like Changeling Outcast is great in this deck. It's unblockable. It's a Gorgon. It's a snake. It does it all.
You're gonna get through, yeah.
We looked at the Gorgons.
They're mostly bad, honestly.
Yeah, they're really expensive. And this deck kind of wants a lot of them. So casting like a 4 or 5 mana Gorgon to just attack once when you could be casting a 1 or 2 mana snake doesn't make a ton of sense. But if you're a fan of Gorgons, as I know many people are, let's get into it. There's the new Vraska, which is a cool one.
Visara the Dreadfuls, an old one. Also very cool.
There's like a lot of different Gorgons that you can look to. None of them are particularly like...
They're not really tailor-made.
They're not on synergy for this deck. I think Vraska the Silencer is worth playing. She's only 3 mana. She's got Death Touch already, and she's got an additional ability that lets you sort of pseudo-steal creature effects.
Yeah.
So that's a very powerful card, but Visara the Dreadful being a 6 mana 5/5 flyer that can kill other things is like almost playable.
Yeah, you probably don't realistically want to be attacking with a Visara. You probably want to be using it to pick off your opponent's creatures.
That's true.
At least that's how I would always play it, but...
There's still some cool Gorgons.
Yeah,
you can go on
each their
Scryfall, look them up, and most of them are going to be in green and black anyway, so you're in luck.
Yeah, if you're paying 6 mana for a 5/5 flyer and you're just attacking with it, probably not what you're looking to do in Commander.
All right, the other ability that your commander has is when those snakes deal damage or when the Gorgons deal damage, you're having your opponent's life totals. That's a hugely poisonous bite. So I wanted to look at some other effects that allow this, because paying 5 every turn is a lot. So we were like, okay, what other ways can we have our opponent's life total without paying that 5 every time?
Yeah, the classic one that's been around for a while is Quietus Spike. This is an equipment. You can put it on a creature, gives it Death Touch, it gives it that ability that halves your opponent's life total. So I think that would be a pretty good include in this for even when your commander might be dead, you still have access to that ability.
Yeah. And you got a lot of Death Touch in this deck, so I guess it gives the equipped creature Death Touch, but you have a lot of tokens in the deck, so you can...
Put it on a token.
Give that snake a spike. The other one is new. It's Unstoppable Slasher from Duskmourn. Unstoppable Slasher is a zombie assassin with Death Touch. He's a 2/3. When he deals combat damage to a player, they lose half their life rounded up. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And when it dies, if it had no counters on it, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with 2 stun counters on it. This card is very powerful.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. Like, this card is quite good. This was definitely one that I underestimated.
It's
and then
really
people started
annoying.
putting it in like competitive decks, and everyone's like, oh yeah, this card's really good.
Yeah, because if the first time it dies, it comes back and it sleeps for 2 turns, but then it's right back attacking.
You just have to keep blocking it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, not great. So very cool to put in this deck, not a snake, but it's doing the snake thing. The other thing you can do that is very common with this kind of drain effect is you can double the amount of life lost this turn, and it turns this ability into a one-shot kill. So, for example, if you have something like Bloodletter of Aklazotz, which is the 4-mana vampire demon, it looks like a bat, but you know, it says if an opponent would lose life during their turn, they lose twice that much life instead. You lose half your life. What's twice half your life?
Your entire life.
Oh, no! So the bat means if you connect with a snake and you pay that ability, they're dead.
Huh. Very cool.
So it is a full KO if you have a Bloodletter of Aklazotz on board. There's a number of effects that are similar to this. Wound Reflection, Warlock class, even Archfiend of Despair will do it all on your end step. pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I like one-shotting people. I think that's pretty neat. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's enough hoops to jump through that this is still a very casual deck. This is still a very fun deck to play against.
You can see it coming for the most part.
Kill the snake, block the snake. It's all...
pretty projected. One nice thing about the commander, though, is that it is an instant speed ability, the 5 mana. So you can still threaten that ability to half their life total without actually.
Oh yeah, you could like if you hold it up in combat, yes.
Correct.
So you could be like, oh, you have to block these little death touchers, otherwise I might be able to half your life total.
And then they block it because that threat of activation is just that scary, and you can still use that 5 mana to spend on other things. So I do think that ability is actually quite powerful.
Yeah, I agree. Finally, you've got a lot of death touchers in this deck. You've got a lot of snakes, a lot of gorgons. You can make even more with your commander. There's some cards that are built around death touch and give you sort of additional synergy. So we're going to talk about those before we move on.
Yeah, so we get like Hooded Blightfang. That's a 1/4 Death Toucher. Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Very good if you have a wide board of Death Touchers like this deck potentially wants.
And this is a life drain deck, right?
Yeah.
Like your ability is very good in the early game and it gets slowly worse throughout the game as opponents' life totals are getting smaller and smaller. Because going from 40 to 20 is a long way, but going from, 10 to 5, that's a lot different life swing. So having some additional drain effects or some additional pump effects is very helpful in actually getting your opponent's life total down to 0.
Yeah, or you could go a completely different route with something like Finn the Fangbearer. So whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. Reminder, if you have 10 poison counters, you lose the game.
If you get hit by 5 snakes, that's it.
That's it.
And Finn has Death Touch himself.
Ooh, 4 snakes and Finn.
4 snakes and a Finn. Yeah, you can do some very cool stuff that to make your board very scary. Even though Death Touch feels like a defensive ability, this deck wants you to turn it into an offensive ability.
Yeah.
I wanted to include some bite effects in this description as well. I wouldn't run like single-use bite spells because you're in black. You just have better removal spells.
What do you mean by bite, Rachel?
Bite spells have a creature in play deal damage to another creature. And when that first creature has Death Touch, it deals 1 or 2 damage to the other creature, and that's enough to kill it no matter how big it is.
Yeah.
So I wanted some sort of repeatable bite spells. That means we can use this ability more than once because black is just always sort of better at targeted removal. So I looked at Helena Kessig Ranger, which says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. When you do, that creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature.
So that just makes whenever one of these creatures enters, you pay an additional 2 and kill something on the board. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a very powerful.
I like that a lot.
It's very powerful, especially when you have a commander that makes Death Touch tokens.
Yeah, and when you have a commander that specifically wants other creatures out of the way so that you can get in and half their life total.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I think it's good in this deck. I also really like Viridian Longbow whenever you have a lot of Death Touchers. This is an equipment that you can attach to a Death Toucher, and it gives the ability, tap, this creature deals 1 damage to any target. So it's sort of a bite on an equipment.
Yeah. And perhaps even maybe finish off those last couple points of damage if you keep having their life total over and over again.
That's true. Finally, you're dealing combat damage in black. There's a couple of sweet creatures that we want to mention before we move on. Grim Hireling, I think we have to bring up. It just says, whenever you hit a player, you make 2 treasure tokens.
This is a commander staple. If you're in black, you should at least look at this card probably. And if you're attacking, then you doubly want to take a look at this. So yeah. Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor is another great one. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay a life and draw a card. So it is symmetrical, quote unquote, like your opponents can take advantage of this effect as well.
But you want your opponents attacking.
Yeah. Like it's draining life just constantly because your opponents are attacking other players. They're losing life. They're drawing cards and losing life from this ability as well. Yeah. I think it's just a win-win overall and keeps you fueled.
And now their blockers are tapped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like Gix a lot. This is a sweet deck. It's very aggressive. It can do some very big splashy things, so it feels like a very fun, very flavorful deck to pilot.
Yeah. I like it a lot. It's definitely something that we haven't seen a ton of in Magic. So I love seeing this like opportunity open up.
We have seen a ton of this next commander in Magic.
Oh my goodness, have we seen a lot of this?
Introduce us.
Dionus, Elvish Archdruid. I'm going to say that's how you pronounce it. It's 3 and a green for a 3/3 legendary creature Elf Druid. Elves you control have whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, untap it, and put a +1/+1 counter on it. This ability triggers only once each turn. Okay.
You know what elves do really, really well?
Tap
Really well.
by themselves.
They're
a lot.
so good at it. They're so good at it. They tap to do everything.
Yeah.
Like I was looking, the first thing I thought of when you look at this is you're like, oh, you want to run the elves that when you tap them, they make a lot of mana.
Yes.
So I looked up a couple of those. Those are some of the more famous elves. And that's really what I think this deck is kind of stylized around, right? Is you're tapping your elves to make a ton of mana, untapping them, tapping them, make even more, and then pumping them into either a very sturdy card draw engine or a activated ability that elves have a lot of, or just leaving them up to block or attack again. That's the craziest thing about me is about Dionus, I think. About me.
That's crazy.
I'm Dionus.
I stay untapped and I'm good at blocking and attacking.
I'm really good at it. Just play Vigilance. I don't even. This is like worse than Vigilance.
No, you get 1/1 counters. This is better than Vigilance.
I'm kidding.
Straight up better than Vigilance.
I'm joking. Is that you can tap all your elves for mana and then untap them to attack.
Yes.
That's like a very serious combo.
Or, hear me out, Rachel.
Yeah.
Hear me out. You tap them, they untap, and then you tap them for whatever ability they had again.
No, ew. Attack with them.
No.
Kill
we don't
me.
attack. We build.
So let's talk about what elves that we can untap. We're going to start with these big mana ones that we've alluded to.
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind is Marwyn the Nurturer. Whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, you can put a 1/1 counter on her, and you can tap to add an amount of green equal to Marwyn's power.
Oh, we got a way to untap her and put counters on her.
Great. Even if you're not playing other elves, which you're playing other elves, this is an elf deck, it is automatically going to start generating mana very, very fast with a commander's ability.
There's a lot of elves that give you mana for the number of elves that you control. We've only brought up just scraping the surface on this. Elvish Archdruid is a very common one. It's 3 mana, it buffs all of your other elves, and then it taps to add green for each elf you control.
Yeah, stuff like that. Perfect. Priest of Titania does a similar type of thing. Taps, adds a green for each elf you control. Circle of Dreams Druid taps, adds a green for each creature you control.
There's tons and tons of these, and I think you're going to run most of them.
Yeah, you're even happy with the simple Llanowar elves, honestly, which tap for a single mana. But it's these ones that can produce multiple mana. That's where things start to get kind of crazy.
Yeah. There's also elves that tap to give you cards. One that I was looking at was Deepwood Denizen. It's got an activated ability that says 5 and a green, tap, draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each +1/+1 counter on creatures you control.
Yeah.
Good thing your commander helps you put +1/+1 counters on your creatures because this is pretty expensive.
And does it reliably, meaning that you will probably have at least a few +1/+1 counters on your creatures randomly by the time you want to start activating this and start refilling your hand.
Yeah. So this is green, tap, draw a card, and then eventually green, tap, draw another card every single turn.
Yeah, very cool in green specifically.
This next one's sweet. It's Bloodline Shaman. It's an elf with an activated ability that says tap, choose a creature type, elf, reveal the top card of your library. If that card is a creature of the chosen type, elf, put it into your hand. Otherwise, put it into your graveyard.
Just gets you more elves. This is basically card draw, but it doesn't hit every single time.
But you get to activate it twice, and you don't have to pay to do it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Pretty sweet.
You can tap your elves to make other elves.
Yeah.
With stuff like Imperious Perfect that says green tap, make an elf.
Yeah.
Or you can tap your elves to interact with stuff your opponents are doing.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of these that I thought were pretty neat, like Jagged Scar Archers, which tap to have it deal damage equal to its power to target creature with flying, and its power toughness reach equal to the number of elves you control. So with the +1/+1 counters and the amount of elves you're amassing, that number's going to get up pretty quick. You start sniping things down. Or like Glissa Sunseeker. This is OG Glissa. You can tap it to destroy target artifact if its converted mana cost is equal to the amount of mana in your mana pool, which is a very weird ability.
Weird ability, for sure. Basically, if you want to kill somebody's talisman, you float 2 green, you let it sit in your mana pool, activate the Glissa Sunseeker, and then untap it. Then you can use that green for whatever.
Yeah, and something that's pretty neat about it is that because elves are very good at generating like different amounts of mana, and because Glissa, you can tap it and then untap it again, you can add more mana to your mana pool when you tap her again to blow up something bigger, or spend mana if you want to blow up something bigger first and then something smaller afterwards. So it's kind of weirdly flexible. I don't see Glissa Sunseeker out on the battlefield super often, but I think it's going to be really neat in this deck.
Very serious engine. Everything that we've talked about is sort of alluding to this huge amount of mana that elves makes. Now, when you're making a ton of mana, you want to make sure that you can use it effectively.
No, I'm just going to sit on it. It's fine.
Right? I mean, you have to be able to spend it. Otherwise, why have it?
Because it's really
Why
cool.
have money if you don't spend it? So you have to make sure that your deck has a very strong draw engines in it, because elves themselves are relatively cheap, but they give you all of this mana. So you need to make sure that you have a way to keep drawing more elves, to keep casting more elves, to keep drawing more, which is sort of the elf soul thing.
Exactly. It's pretty common for you to just play out a bunch of your cheap elves and then, well, you have done so. Congratulations, you have no more cards. So you need stuff like Leaf Crown Visionary, which is whenever you cast an elf spell, you may pay a green. If you do, draw a card. So then when you're chaining those elves together, they're replacing themselves. And that keeps the engine going. Hopefully you're drawing more elves. Keeps going like that. Something like Elven Chorus lets you look at the top card of your deck, and then you can play things from the top of your deck. And
like elves.
Like elves. It also has a very, very relevant ability of creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. So even the elves that don't have tap abilities that find their way into this deck can now benefit from the commander's ability.
Eladamri Corvectol is new from Modern Horizons 3. It lets you cast creature spells off the top of your library. Perfect. And then he also has a tap ability. Green, tap 2 untapped creatures you control. Incredible. Reveal a card from your hand or the top card of your library. If you reveal a creature card this way, put it onto the battlefield. Activate only during your turn.
Cool.
Twice?
Cool. I'm just going to start cheating some stuff into play. I'll take that. Thank you very much.
So playing off the top of your library is a very efficient way to draw a lot of cards, but you're going to want actual card draw to make sure you have a full hand as well.
Yeah, so there's some great includes, like, because of the amount of +1/+1 counters that you're putting on things, you can do something like Armorcraft Judge, which is also an elf. Whenever it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it.
Nice.
You can do something like Regal Force. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each green creature you control.
Elves, famously green.
Famously green, basically.
So
everything you
green.
have is going to be green.
And the most famous elf card draw engine of all is Glimpse of Nature. It's a single green for a sorcery that says whenever you play a creature spell this turn, draw a card.
Yeah, this one you kind of have to sandbag a little bit, meaning that you have to like kind of wait to play it. You don't play this out on turn 1. You wait until like turn 4 or 5 when you can play this and then start chaining some elves together.
By turn 4, you should have what, 1 million mana with elves?
I mean, probably like 6, maybe 7. So ideally, that's what you're looking for.
We've talked about a lot of the engine cards in this deck, what makes the deck work, but you need some big payoffs to make sure the elves can close out the game. Good thing elves are great at that too.
Yeah, Azuri Renegade Leader. It's a legendary elf. The important ability on this is 2 green, total of 5 mana. Elf creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. One thing that's very easy to miss, which when I first started playing, definitely did not realize this, you can activate this ability as many times as you want. You pay 5 mana, +3/+3 to everything, and trample. Do it again. So it's 6 + 9.
Only 15 mana to get +9/+9, but
That's not
elves can do that.
Yeah, that's not
though.
out of the realm of possibility. It sounds ridiculous. Just wait until you put an elf deck together, and then you'll see, oh, yeah, this is pretty cool.
Elvish Warmaster makes elf tokens and has an activated ability that pumps your elves. Allosaurus Shepherd is expensive still, but it's got an activated ability that turns all your elves into dinosaurs.
Dinosaur elves.
And they become 5/5s, which is pretty good too.
Yes, and make sure all of your elves stick because your elves can't be countered. Very
Nice.
cool.
Galadrim Brigade is from the Lord of the Rings holiday cards, I believe. It's 2 and a green for an elf soldier with squad, 1 and a green. And it says other elves you control get +1/+1.
So you can squad this a bunch of times, and then it'll just buff your elves permanently because this is a creature that sticks on the board.
So basically, when you pay a squad, you can pay the squad edition as many times as you would like. Let's say 3 times. So you'll pay the original 3 plus squad 3 times. Then you make the original copy and 3 copies of this. So now you have 4 elves that are all giving other elves +1/+1.
So for those of us that are bad at math, that's +4 +4.
+4.
We're good at math.
Yes. Good job. Plus, you have 4 elves on the battlefield, which is pretty good for all your mana generators.
Yep. Yeah, so there's plenty of big win the game cards that exist. You can do something like a Craterhoof Behemoth, which is probably the classic quintessential green that goes wide, ends the game commander card.
What I like about this card, which is what I talked about earlier, right? You can tap it to make all this mana. You can cast your Craterhoof, and your creatures have already untapped to attack this turn. So it means you can cast Craterhoof like 2 turns earlier, basically, and still have creatures to attack with when it comes down.
Yeah, that's true, because otherwise you're potentially using your elves for mana, and then those elves cannot be used in order to attack with a buff from Craterhoof. That's a normal elf deck. But this is not a normal elf deck.
This is faster than a normal elf deck.
This is really sweet elf deck.
It's mono green, but it is spicy.
Ooh, good thing we finally broke Craterhoof Behemoth.
Good thing. Elves broken. This is a sweet deck. It's very, very powerful. Obviously, it's like twice as fast as any elf deck. You have a 4-mana commander who's going to be a lightning rod for removal, but you're elves.
Yeah.
You'll recast him.
One thing I did want to mention before we move on, because this will likely come up, the ability that says only once this turn, if the commander goes away, it gets blinked, it gets returned to hand, whatever it is, and you recast it, or it gets returned to the battlefield somehow, you can now do all that stuff again, because that is a new permanence. That means that old ability that said only once per turn, now gone. There's a new ability that says, hey, you can do this, but only once per turn. But it's new, so you can do it again.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, so I'm sure that'll come up. Cyclonic Rifts will happen and stuff in games that'll bounce your commander back to hand. You can recast it and then just start doing all that stuff all over.
Or you could use like a Quirion Ranger?
Yeah, Wirewood Symbiote.
Wirewood Symbiote.
Yeah.
The one that returns an elf to hand and
you know what it does?
Untaps a creature.
It untaps a creature.
Yeah, that seems pretty good.
So you can return your commander to hand, recast your commander, do it all again.
Seems pretty good.
Yeah, that's probably broken.
All right, that's what we're going to talk about in the first half, but we have lots more commanders to go, so stick around after a few words from our sponsors. Oh, hello there. Admiring my trophies? Yes, it's me, multi-format staple tireless tracker, and I've tracked some mighty fine beasts. The Balos of Zendikar, the Great Horns of Ikoria, Yargle. But there's one thing I haven't been able to track. Where all my hard-earned cash keeps going. That's why I signed up for Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Their clear dashboard makes it super easy to craft a personal budget. Plus, it clued me into a bunch of things I forgot I was even paying for, like membership to my old gym that got destroyed by the Phyrexians. But Rocket Money tracked it down and did the most tiring part of it all, calling customer service and canceling it. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. So get a clue about your finances and sign up for Rocket Money.
Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/commandzone. That's rocketmoney.com/commandzone. Again, rocketmoney.com/commandzone.
You know what's wild?
What?
I have like hundreds of Magic cards memorized, right? Name, cost, rules, text, but the moment I have to remember like 3 passwords, I'm cooked.
That's why all my passwords are just pay the one.
Dude, we're recording this.
Oh crap, I'm ruined.
Don't worry, it'll be fine, because we can use 1Password to get you back up and running. 1Password's award-winning password manager is the best way to keep your business's data and login credentials secure. You can set strong, unique passwords for all your accounts without relying on memorization or post-it notes. And 1Password makes security easy for your whole team. It's super user-friendly with simple, secure sharing. Plus, it's seamless to switch between devices. Whether you need access from your phone or laptop, it's always a breeze, especially with features like autofill for quick sign-ins. Best of all, once you don't have to remember your passwords anymore, you won't accidentally say them on camera.
Yeah, I wish I'd been using 1Password this whole time. This seems great. Okay, my new password is Ristic.
No, cut the tape!
Right now, our listeners get a free 2-week trial at onepassword.com/commandzone for your growing business. That's 2 free weeks at onepassword.com/commandzone.
Don't let security slow your business down. Go to onepassword.com/commandzone.
All right, my new deck list is complete. Now, let's see which cards I don't already own and buy them.
Wait, How'd you do that without going through a million boxes?
Oh, I just use ARCHIDEKT. They make it super easy to upload and manage your collection. Then, when you're done brewing a deck, you can sort it by collection status to see what you already have.
So this group is just cards you don't own.
Yep, I just click buy this stack, and it takes me right to Card Kingdom.
Whoa.
ARCHIDEKT is the best place to browse, brew, and playtest commander decks. Just go to archidekt.com/commandzone to get started.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com/commandzone.
Welcome back, everybody. We are talking about new commanders from Foundations Jumpstart. Up next, we're talking about Evereth, a Viceroy of Plunder.
Ooh.
2 and a black for a legendary creature, Vampire Soldier. She's a 2/2 with flying. She has 2 abilities. The first is sacrifice another creature or artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Evereth, Viceroy of Plunder. If the sacrifice permanent was a treasure, Evereth gains lifelink until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. Then, whenever it dies, you may pay 1 and hybrid Rakdos. When you do, Evereth deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So you can sacrifice creatures, you can sacrifice artifacts. If you sacrifice treasures, she gets lifelink.
Yeah.
She loves it.
She's a viceroy. Whenever I think of viceroy, I always think of the viceroy of the Trade Federation.
It's
from
very,
Star Wars,
very
Episode
Star Wars.
1. Yeah.
So this is a red and black sacrifice deck. So the plan is you're going to make a ton of things. Then you're going to sacrifice all those things. It's going to buff your commander. Then you're even going to sacrifice your commander and dome all your opponents for a whole bunch of damage.
Yeah, so quite likely, one limiting factor is that you can only activate the sacrifice ability as a sorcery. So you cannot sit on all of those creatures and artifacts and just wait until something happens for you to sacrifice all of that stuff. You do have to do it on your turn. So you do kind of have to put all of your snakes in one basket here, as it were.
One Viceroy basket.
One Viceroy basket is going to be the name of the next fantasy football team. But that is something that you have to keep in mind. You have to figure out how you want to split the permanents that you keep on board and permanents that you sacrifice to this ability to get it as big as possible, because you do want it big when it eventually dies.
So you can take this deck in 2 directions. You can take it a very creature sacrifice deck, or you can take it an artifact sacrifice deck. I kind of focused on the artifact sacrifice deck, which we'll talk about largely because the lifelink ability is very, very powerful.
Yeah.
But if you want to fill this deck with lots of little tokens, like we talked about before, sacrifice all of them and buff up Evereth, that also works too. We're just going to sort of focus on the artifact side of things.
Yep. We love it.
Right. So we're going to talk about treasures first, because you're going to want some way to give her lifelink.
Yeah, so what's a good way? Guess who's back? Back again. Grim Hireling's back. Mm-hmm. Tell a friend. It's a black card that makes treasures. You probably want this.
Yep, and your commander has flying.
Yeah.
So it helps deal damage. That evasive ability is very strong here. And the friend that you mentioned is Professional Facebreaker.
Yes.
Who is very similar to Grim Hireling. When you deal combat damage, you make treasures. And it gives you another ability to sacrifice treasures too, if you'd like.
And again, remember that this deck is a red-black deck because it does have that little hybrid mana symbol in there. Again, very easy to miss.
A way to make a ton of treasures all at once is Descent into Avernus.
Yeah, this is at the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 descent counters on it. Then each player creates X treasure tokens, and it deals X damage to each player, where X is the number of descent counters on Descent into Avernus. This gets out of hand very fast because you play it, wait a turn, 2 damage, everyone gets 2 treasures, then 4, then 6. And the amount of damage that's being caused to everybody, as well as the amount of treasures that are being made, just accelerates the game very, very fast. But I think that's kind of what you want.
Yeah, it's very helpful with your commander that has this when it dies damage ability. If you can chip away at their life total in the early game and then sacrifice your commander, half your work is done for you.
Exactly.
Plus it gives you the treasures to buff her up and to give her lifelink when she dies. So something that's worth noting is lifelink works even if it's not just combat damage.
That's a good point.
So you can sacrifice a treasure to Evereth, put a +1 counter on her, she gains lifelink, and then when you sacrifice Evereth herself, when she dies, you pay 1 and a black or red, and when she dies, she deals damage equal to each opponent. All of the damage she dealt has lifelink. So you gain that much. She's basically like Grey Merchant of Asphodel
Yes.
in the command zone, with a couple of more hoops to jump through, of course.
Yeah, but each opponent is quite powerful. That was something that I also easily missed on the first rate. There was like, oh, it deals damage to target opponent, target player, what have you. But it deals that damage to each opponent, and with that life link, like you said, you can gain a ridiculous amount of life and put yourself so far out of reach of everybody else.
Yeah. Ruthless Technomancer is very cool in this deck because it makes a lot of treasures and it's a way to sacrifice your commander in a pinch. 4 mana, when it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice another creature. If you do, make treasure tokens equal to that creature's power. So you make a ton of treasure tokens, you trigger your commander, and then you have more treasure tokens for when you cast her again.
Perfect. That's all we want to do.
Ruthless Technomancer also has an ability that it lets you sack artifacts, and where you can return a creature card with power X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, like your commander who only has 2 power.
I love that overlap. You can send your commander to the graveyard instead of the command zone if you'd like. Activate its ability, get it back. You didn't have to pay any commander tax. How about that?
Pretty sweet. It's going to be very helpful to do all these loop-de-doop-dees, which you're going to probably sacrifice this more than once.
Yeah. Some other great ways to get like lots of treasures. Brass's Bounty. It gets you treasure equal to the amount of lands that you have. The Reaver Cleaver is a really neat one.
That's a very
I love
fun
this
one.
card.
Reaver Cleaver is an equipment. It gives the equipped creature +1/+1 in trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, create that many treasure tokens. Now, don't get greedy. This is combat damage only.
I got so excited for half a second.
No. So you equip the Reaver Cleaver to your commander, and let's say she has no counters on her. I can't even imagine that. So she's a 3/3, and when you hit, you make 3 treasure tokens that you can sacrifice to make her bigger next turn.
That means she won't be a 3/3 for long. And then that just snowballs out of control because it gets you more treasures the next time you hit, yada, yada, so on and so forth.
A lot of ways to make treasures in red and black. It's going to be a very fun engine style deck, and it gives you a way to use treasures that, like, obviously you could be cracking these for mana as well, which is really busted. So
yeah, treasures are just good as
treasures
it turns out.
are really good.
So making lots of them, even if you're not sacrificing them to your commander, you can probably do cool things with them.
And if you don't want to focus on sacrificing stuff to make your commander big, maybe you just want to sacrifice one treasure, give her lifelink, and then you can also buff her in other ways. Something like Blade of the Blood Chief says whenever a creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on the equipped creature. But if the equipped creature is a vampire, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it instead.
Now, Rachel, what are the creature type?
A vampire!
This card? Yes. So you get the 2 1/1 counters. Hooray!
Pretty sweet. This is great if you go the more creature sacrifice route because you have an engine to sacrifice them, make your commander really, really big, very fast, and you can deal a ton of damage right away.
It's only 1 to play, 1 to equip as well, so very efficient for what it can do.
Tarion Soul Cleaver does a very similar thing, except for it also triggers off of all those treasure tokens that you're making. Cranial Ram gives the equipped creature +X/+1, where X is the number of artifacts you control, like treasures.
It's pretty good.
And then, all of these count for buffs that make the damage your commander does even more. Because you can only sacrifice stuff at sorcery speed with her, but you could sacrifice her at any moment as long as you have an ability that lets you sacrifice, which we're going to talk about that in a second. There's a couple more ways that you can buff her.
Yes, because she's a vampire, you can do something like Cordial Vampire, where whenever it or another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control, which is pretty cool if you're going the creature type focused route.
I also like that this triggers on any creature, not just yours.
Yes.
So your vampires can get big very fast depending on what is happening on your opponent's boards.
Yeah.
Patron of the Vein does a similar thing. It enters and it kills a creature, and then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it and put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control.
Yep. Not quite as controllable, but it has that destroy target creature whenever it enters, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Plus it's a vampire, which is fun.
Yeah. And now to the fun part. The part that I like the most. It's the let's one-shot some people, Rachel.
Yeah. All the people.
All
Each
of the people,
opponent,
all of them. So obviously we do want to make her quite big. And the best way to do that, other than sacrificing things to the ability, is things that just do that by itself. So something like Unleash Fury, which is an instant where you can double the power of target creature until end of turn.
Sweet. You sacrifice like 3 treasure tokens. Now she's a 5/5. You cast this and you double it, and now she's a 10/10.
Yeah.
That's a lot of damage.
And because this is at instant speed, again, you can't do the first ability of sacrificing to put a 1/1 counter on it at instant speed. But If somebody goes to, say, kill your commander, you can double it and then get everybody just out of nowhere.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You thought you were safe.
Yeah.
If you want to
Do this to the extreme.
It's really good with all the lifelink that your commander offers. It's Hatred, 3 black for an instant. Pay X life, target creature gets +X+O until end of turn. So you cast this 5-mana instant targeting your commander. You can pay, 20 life. Now your commander gets +20+O and will likely one-shot all of your opponents.
Yeah, you can just go all the way down to a single life point, and then you'll gain it all right back if
as
you
long as
activate
you've
that second
sacrificed a
ability.
treasure, yeah.
Yeah, but probably your opponents are all dead at that point, so...
If you want to be a little spicy, a trick you can also do is cast Tainted Strike, targeting your commander. It's a single black for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Infect until end of turn.
Bringing back the poison counters from earlier, remember, Infect makes the creature deal damage in the form of poison counters, and 10 poison counters equals you lose the game, which makes doing that with your commander's ability heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, that you only have to get her power up to 10 now, or 9.
9
with
and then +1 with
the
Tainted Strike,
Tainted
yeah.
Strike. And then you sacrifice her, and that's the game, as long as all of that goes according to plan.
Yeah.
We haven't talked much about ways to sacrifice her. There's some great lands that do it, like High Market. I would definitely play in this deck.
For sure.
But I also think you're running stuff like Fling,
This is a classic.
which is an instant for 1 and a red. It says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Fling deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target.
Now, notably, Fling is doing the damage in this case, not your commander. But your commander's ability will also trigger
Yeah.
when you fling it.
And then you pay an additional 1 and a black or
Yes.
1 and a red and hit everybody else as well. Fling or Kazul's Fury, there's a lot of effects like this, will give you both things your commander is looking for, which is a sacrifice effect and even more damage.
Yeah, this deck seems sweet.
It's pretty cool. I will be honest.
I love making big things and attacking with big things, and then just one-shotting people out of nowhere.
Not to mention that, like, it does have this whole, like, sacrifice thing going on where
Yeah.
you could run effects that trigger when stuff goes to the graveyard. Your commander is just a sacrifice outlet. So you could play stuff that cares about when artifacts or maybe creatures go to the graveyard, like a Marionette Apprentice.
Yeah, that's whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses a life. Or if you're super heavy on the artifacts, you could do Marionette Master, where it can come into play with 3+1/+1 counters, making it a 4-power creature. And whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. That's a great way to drain somebody very, very fast.
Yeah, there's always one person at the table that has a higher life total than everybody else. It's probably you. In this game, it's probably you.
Hopefully it's you. But if you haven't activated the ability, if your commander has not
Yeah.
died yet, then it's probably not you, right?
Yeah, then you can use this to sort of get that player into range and sacrifice your commander and deal the rest of the damage. Mirkwood Bats triggers when you create or sacrifice a token, perfect for making or sacrificing treasures, making or sacrificing vampire tokens.
Yep.
Any direction you want to take this.
Mayhem Devil, whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any targets. Whichever direction you're going with this, artifacts or creatures, this card is going to do some work. Crime Novelist, that's whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a 1/1 counter on it, and you add a red mana.
I like Crime Novelist in particular because you're sacrificing all of your treasures, which would normally be giving you mana. And this sort of lets you eat your treasures and have them too.
Yeah, it makes them less of a feel bad. Or, to be honest, you could just sacrifice your treasures for mana and then get an additional red mana, and so now they activate
They
for
tap
2.
it. Yeah, now they double your treasure mana.
Yeah, treasures are pretty good.
Pretty powerful. So this deck is really interesting. There's a lot of different ways you can die to it, and many of them are flexible and very powerful. So just make sure when you're building her that you make a decision. Are you going this artifact route, like with all the treasure makers and that kind of thing? Or are you going more creature-based, and maybe you're running more like Zulaport, Cutthroat type effects, which only trigger when creatures go to the graveyard?
Yeah, you can do a little bit of overlap. So you can look for cards like the Cranial Ram I really like because it makes a creature token as well that comes with it. And so that will be useful even if you're going the artifact route. But you probably do, like you said, want to just like choose one that you want to do primarily.
Yeah. All right. Up next, another vampire.
Ooh.
It's Ivora, Insatiable Heir. 1 and a red for a legendary creature, vampire warrior. She's a 1/1 with trample. Pfft. When Ivora enters and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a blood token.
Ooh.
And then whenever you discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Ivora. Blood tokens are artifact tokens that say 1, tap, discard a card, and then you draw a card.
Yeah.
So it's a little, lets you cycle a card in your hand.
Yeah, you do have to sacrifice it in order to do that, but who cares?
That's okay. You're going to make more.
Yes, exactly. I love the design of this. It's a 1/1 trampler, but ideally it's not going to stay a 1/1 for long. Now will it, Rachel?
You're going to be discarding a lot of cards. So this is a red discard style deck that is going to discard a lot of cards to draw even more cards, put counters on Ivora to keep churning through your deck, and then eventually you'll find some kind of payoff either by killing your opponents with your enormous trampling vampire or a burn spell that cares about the number of things in your graveyard since you've been cycling so much, or you just draw into a big splashy cool thing, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, but I think just killing with the Trampoline Commander is probably the coolest.
Probably.
And a great way to do that is Anya's Ravager.
Yeah.
When this attacks, discard your hand and then draw 3 cards. So, yeah, you're not going to have a ton of cards in hand if you are constantly attacking with this, which it does have to attack each combat if able. But it is an excellent way to just keep discarding cards and drawing new cards. So you're putting stuff in the bin, growing your commander very, very fast, ideally. So love that.
It also has Madness.
Yeah.
Which works very well with your commander. It says Madness 1 and a red. If you discard this card, discard it into exile. When you do, cast it for its Madness cost or put it into your graveyard. So when you discard it, you get an option to either cast it for its Madness cost or just discard it regularly. So you get to discard this spell, draw a new card to a blood token, and still cast this spell which you discarded.
Yeah, it's perfect. Love stuff like that. Inti is a newer card. It's pretty good. Most importantly, I guess not most importantly, whole card, pretty important. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains trample until end of turn. So you can buff your commander, but your commander does already have trample. Doesn't matter that much. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next end step. So this helps get around the inherent disadvantage of discarding cards because you're probably going to have fewer cards in hand than most other people at the table. Your deck cares more about discarding than it does about drawing. Now, there are some ways to offset that, but Inti is probably one of the best ways to help with that.
I would think so. I mean, every time you sacrifice a blood token, you discard a card, you draw a card from the blood token, you trigger Inti and exile a new card. Now you've discarded 1 and you're up a selection of 2 cards.
Yeah, even though it's not drawing per se.
You still get the opportunity to play
Exactly.
it. So Inti's going to go very, very well with your commander. Anything that lets you sort of get benefit when you're discarding is great. Change of Fortune is perfect for this deck. Very exciting.
Yeah.
This card's awesome. It's 3 and a red. Discard your hand, then draw a card for each card you've discarded this turn.
I've always wanted to find a home for this card. And I think we found it, Rachel.
Now's your moment.
We found
it has a vampire on it. It's vampire themed.
From Crimson Vow. It's
where bloods
perfect.
were born. So you
Beautiful.
sacrifice 2 blood tokens, let's say, and you discard a card, you draw a card, you discard a card, you draw a card. Then you cast Change of Fortune. You discard your hand, so that's 4 cards. Now you've discarded 6 cards this turn, and you draw a fresh 6. You're up cards.
Yeah, it's so cool. And because potentially other parts of your deck probably also want you to be discarding cards as well, it could be even more. You could get 7 or more.
Yeah.
You could get 10 cards. Obviously, that's a little living the dream, but if your deck is up and running, then this will help your deck surge ahead.
You're a mono red vampire. You live the dream all the time.
Yeah.
One I want to talk about because it is very weird is Decaying Time Loop. 3 and a red for an instant. Discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards. Retrace.
Okay, so what is Retrace, Rachel?
Retrace says you may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other costs.
What was that again, Rachel?
Discarding a land card.
Discarding. We love discarding in this deck. Ha ha!
Think of how big your commander will be. So you discard a mountain to this. It triggers your commander. You get a counter on it. And then you discard your whole hand. Trigger your commander. You get counted for each card you discard. And then you draw that many cards. And if you draw a land, You can do this again.
And again, and again, and again, as many times as you have the mana in order to do it and lands in order to discard. So I guess that runs out pretty darn quickly. But
And the crazy thing about it is it's an instant.
yeah. So
You can do this after blocks.
that's a good point. I didn't think about that.
They're like, Ivora is like a 10/10. It's like, that's going to feel pretty bad. I can't really lose this right now. And she has trample. So you're like, no blocks? Great. Decaying time loop. Discard my hand. Draw 5. Counters.
Discard. Cast it again.
Cast it again. You're dead.
Yeah, because with the retrace, it doesn't exile itself or anything.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Pretty neat.
Okay. Wheels are always good. We mentioned Change of Fortune. Wheel of Misfortune is perfect for this deck as well. We've already talked about cycling. Cycling is a great ability to be sneaking into this deck. I would include land cyclers like Ash Barons or Oliphant. Which
Already
are
good cards that are in Commander, yeah.
just good cards, and they're 1 mana to cycle, and you get a land back. So you get that counter ability, you get all the discard synergies, and you still have the land.
Yeah, seems perfect in this.
And then finally, your deck is going to be doing a ton of rummaging, which is discarding a card and then drawing some cards.
Yeah, so perhaps, I was going to say the most famous of these, but it's not technically rummaging. The shorthand in Magic for this is looting. Faithless looting. This one's draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and has flashback for 2 and a red, meaning you can cast it from the graveyard for the flashback cost. So looting is you draw and then discard. Rummaging is you discard and then draw. So like the blood tokens are rummaging, whereas this is looting. Excellent card. No
It's
notes.
great. I mean, and it has flashback, so it's a great thing for you to discard to blood tokens in the early game. It does a lot. Demand Answers is perfect. It's a 2 mana instant that you can either discard a card as an additional cost or sacrifice an artifact as an additional cost. We have both of those.
There's
Perfect.
a ton of these types of effects that
And then
exist
you
in
draw
Magic.
2. This is the best one. There's dozens. Dozens is a high. There's some.
I think there's
half
like
a dozen.
There's like 5 or 6, I think.
Yeah.
For 2 mana, draw 2 cards, discard a card.
You get it. The instants are going to be best in your deck because you can use them kind of like the combat trick that we were talking about before. You can discard that card at instant speed, get a counter out of nowhere. This is a very fun one that I think is perfect for the deck. Vault 21. House Gambit. It's 1 and a red. It's a saga. The first chapter is discard a card, then draw a card. Relatively simple. The second chapter is the same thing. Discard a card, then draw a card.
You want to be doing that.
The third chapter is reveal up to 5 non-land cards from your hand. For each of those cards that has the same mana value as another card revealed this way, create a treasure token.
Hey, that's pretty neat.
And then you like win the lottery and you get a bunch of treasures out of it. This deck is really good at card selection.
Yeah.
So getting a bunch of cards that are the same mana value is actually not so hard when you have blood tokens, you have the rummaging from the saga, you've got all sorts of different cards that give you selection. I think it'd be fun to try. I don't know how good it is. I think it's neat.
I think it pays itself back with, even if you get like 3 treasures off this, I think that's worth a card slot.
Alhamret's Archive is probably a card you should put into this deck. You're going to be doing a lot of getting rid of 2 cards and getting 2 cards back. But if you have a card that says, I draw twice the number of cards that I would, now you're up cards. So all of these cards that we're talking about just get so much better. I don't often love Alhamret's Archive, but I think if you're doing this much looting and rummaging and cracking blood tokens, it becomes very powerful.
Yeah.
Speaking of blood tokens.
Let's make more of them.
It's a Markov Enforcer deck.
Woohoo!
I love this card.
Woohoo!
4 red for a vampire soldier. Whenever it or another vampire enters the battlefield under your control, Markov Enforcer fights up to 1 target creature an opponent controls.
Let's go.
It's a 6/6. That's great.
It'll
and
probably
then,
kill it.
whenever a creature dealt damage by Markov Enforcer this turn dies, create a blood token. This is a repeatable fight ability. So making 2 creatures fight that also gets you bloods.
Chef's kiss.
Come on.
Beautiful. And your commander's a vampire. It's a win-win.
That's awesome. You should also probably play Olivia's Attendants. So whenever they deal damage, they create that many blood tokens, and they're a 6/6 with menace. It's a lot of blood tokens.
Also has an activated ability to pay 3 mana and deal a damage to any targets. This one
also makes a blood token.
makes a blood token when you do that. So you can pay 3 mana, make a blood token whenever you feel like it.
Very cool. Lots of ways to discard. Let's figure out how we're getting paid off here. We already talked about the Alhamret's Archive, which is helpful, but there's a lot of ways to sort of alleviate some of the downsides.
Yeah, so there's the containment construct. So whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard, and if you do, you may play that card this turn. Very neat ability to make it so you can actually cast the things that you've discarded.
Yeah, so you discard a land card to your blood token, you can exile it, play that land as your land for turn, and you've got the card that you drew.
Yeah, you can do something like Anger. As long as Anger's in your graveyard, all your creatures have haste. And you also have to control a mountain. Woohoo, going to be very difficult in this mono red deck of ours that we've just built.
We can manage.
We can do that.
Squee Goblin Nabob says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may return Squee from your graveyard to your hand.
Squee's just getting discarded over and over again is what's
No,
happening.
don't. Please don't.
See ya, Squee. Whee!
You discard, put him back in your hand, discard him again, put him back in your hand. He's very helpful when you're doing all of this.
He's just like a little bouncy ball. Boop, 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 boop.
So cool.
Yeah. You can do something like a Brawlin Sky Shark Rider. Whenever you discard a card, put a 1/1 counter on it, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent.
Yeah, something similar is Glinthorn Buccaneer or Surly Badgersaur. I
cool.
love this card, and I've never put him in a deck.
Yeah.
Whenever you discard a creature card, put a +1 counter on him. Whenever you discard a land card, create a treasure token. Whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, Surly Badgersaur fights up to 1 target creature you don't control.
Yeah, it seems very neat, but also I could very easily foresee a situation where you have this card in play, and then you're like, now I have to think so hard about the things that I'm going to discard because it matters whether it gets bigger, whether you get mana, whether you fight something. So many options there.
But pretty cool.
Yeah.
Veronica Dissident Scribe says whenever you discard 1 or more non-land cards for the first time each turn, make a junk token. What's a junk token?
It's an artifact with tap, sacrifice this artifact, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, activate only as a sorcery. So a little inty-ish.
Yeah, it's kind of inty-ish. It's kind of containment construct-ish.
Yeah.
It's a 3-mana creature from Fallout. Yeah.
Yes, from Fallout.
So there's a lot of different ways that you can like benefit from discard. Like you could discard lands and play a Crucible of Worlds. So now you can play your lands out of your graveyard.
Perfect.
You could discard cards and get additional value off of them with something like a currency converter. So this can be your engine. It can be your payoff. It depends on how you want to focus it. And it's going to be a lot of things to you because you'll be discarding a lot. Finally, how does this deck win? It's doing a lot.
Well, again, the most obvious is you one-shot somebody with your commander because your commander is ideally freakishly huge and it has trample. So you don't really need that much more help for that to become like a reasonable threat.
Yeah.
Problem with that is you're not always going to have your commander.
And it takes a lot of discarding to go from 1 to 20.
Yeah.
So to 21, in order to kill somebody with commander damage. So you probably want some help bringing that life total down. Something like a Cavalier of Flame is perfect. It's a creature that when it enters the battlefield, you discard any number of cards and draw that many. Sure, perfect. And then when it dies, it deals X damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control, where X is the number of land cards in your graveyard.
I love cards like this whenever you're trying to build a deck and you're looking for things that are a finisher, which this could potentially be, but also it just is an engine in and of itself, and that it's doing that discarding and drawing that's going to help fuel your commander. So it just fulfills so many roles in a deck like this, which I love.
Yeah. Pyrogoyf is another very powerful one. Whenever it or another Lurgoyf enters the battlefield under your control, that creature deals damage equal to its power to any target. And its power is equal to the number of card types in all players' graveyards. So
Ideally yours is going to be big, but who knows? You could find a couple other card types in other people's graveyards.
Absolutely. So it could be as big as a 9/10, and you have a lot of control over that because you get to decide what cards you're discarding. Pyroglyph seems great. You can send it upstairs. You can use Red's ability to copy creatures and copy things like your Cavalier of Flame or your Pyroglyph. These ETBs are very, very powerful.
Yeah, super neat.
And then you've got a big vampire.
Yes.
Let's just attack with her as many times as we possibly can.
Yeah, so ideally you just want to attack. We're going to pretend we kept it alive this whole time, and it is huge, and we attacked with it. So there's stuff like Ketis, where whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals damage to each other opponent. Helps you kill everybody all at once. As long as one person is relatively open, you can deal damage to everybody. You do something like overpowering attack. It's got free running for 2 and a red. Ooh, if you dealt damage with your commander, you can cast it for its free running cost, which is very nice because it untaps all creatures you control that attacked this turn. And if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase and an additional main phase, meaning you can attack again.
Nice.
Which we love.
Finally, I really like Fear of Missing Out. It's 1 and a red for an enchantment creature, Nightmare. When it enters, you discard a card and draw a card. Great. And then whenever it attacks for the first time each turn, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, untap target creature, your big ol' commander. Ooh. And after this phase, there's an additional combat phase.
Very nice.
Perfect. Great synergy here. It's got the discard and the draw. It cares about stuff in your graveyard, and you only need to attack with your one big creature. So This card is awesome. Murph and I were talking about this a little bit beforehand, and it is an uncommon mono-colored commander, and I'm obsessed.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because it like fulfills the fantasy of we want to do things with blood tokens because we think blood tokens are sick. It helps one-shot people. I love one-shotting people. It's my favorite thing to do in Commander. It lets you do all these cool, tricky things by like discarding, drawing cards, and like sculpting your hand and doing all this madness stuff. Like it's just really, really neat.
And you get to do some vampire synergy that like just in mono red, which is not necessarily something that you see on top of that.
Yeah, there's all these different directions, not directions per se, but all these different things that it can do. And I'm curious to like tweak and test something like this and see how much of each effect this type of deck wants.
A weird one. It's Neerdiv, Devious Diver.
Yeah, it's a Merfolk Rogue, 2 and a blue for a 2/2. Whenever it becomes tapped, target player mills cards equal to its power. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard or activate an ability of a card in your graveyard, draw a card and put a 1/1 counter on it.
Cool.
Yeah. This one's interesting.
Yeah, so you're trying to cast spells and activate abilities from your graveyard. So likely when the Neerdiv becomes tapped, the target player that you're targeting is yourself.
Yes, because you want to use your graveyard.
You get more cards into your graveyard. You can draw more cards with your commander's ability. It all sort of spirals from there. So this is going to be a mono blue deck that is designed to fill up your graveyard so you can use activated abilities and things from there, which will make your commander bigger, which means she'll mill more cards. You'll probably untap her, tap her again to mill more cards,
I like
draw
the sound of this
more
already.
cards. It's very dirtily sort of spells-based blue deck.
Yeah, and I think the first thing that kind of comes to mind when you're thinking about something like this or casting a spell or activating an ability from a graveyard is flashback. So flashback is an ability that it says flashback and then a cost. You may cast this card from your graveyard for its flashback cost, then exile it. So you can only use it the one time, but it basically gives you a spell from the graveyard. You didn't have to have it in your hand. You could just cast it from your graveyard.
Yeah, and there's a lot of abilities like this that allow you to cast the spells from your graveyard. Flashback does it, Jumpstart, Disturb, Retrace, Escape, even Aftermath does it, the like sideways cards.
Oh, yeah.
So you can always look for those keywords on cards to find new abilities that can go into this deck. But Flashback is going to be the most common one, so let's start there. Otherworldly Gaze is perfect. It's got Surveil 3, which lets you look at the top 3 and put some into your graveyard. Perfect. And it has Flashback for 1 and a blue. Lantern Bearer is a little creature with Disturb. You can cast it from the graveyard as an aura that gives your commander flying.
Ooh.
So what I like about this one is it's really cheap. And giving your commander flying means you can start milling her even if you don't have a specific way to tap her down.
Exactly.
She is small.
Yeah. You could be super cheeky about how you get her tapped, or you could just attack with her in the air.
Yeah.
Works there as well. You got something like Glimpse of Freedom, which is draw a card and it has Escape. Exile 5 other cards from your graveyard for 3 mana. Ideally, you wouldn't be putting cards in your graveyard. Something like this is very cool. Notably, Escape does not exile the card itself from the graveyard. It puts it back into the graveyard. So you can exile 5 other cards, cast this, and then it goes back into the graveyard. You can cast it again for its escape cost by exiling another 5 cards and paying that escape cost.
And remember, you're drawing an additional card with your commander every time you do.
Yeah.
Maximize Altitude is nice. It's similar to Lantern's Lift. It has target creature gets +1/+1 in flying until end of turn and Jumpstart. So you can do it 2 times.
Very neat. I love Start the TARDIS. Another cool Doctor Who card, Surveil 2, then draw a card. You may Planeswalk. Probably not going to do that. But if you're playing a plane chase game, you'll really get your opponents by saying, haha, check this out.
Got him.
But it also has Jumpstart. So it's surveilling. You can Jumpstart it from the graveyard, use it a second time. Very neat.
Finally, something like Demi-Lich is a card you look for a spot, and this might be the one. It's blue, 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 blue for a skeleton wizard. It's a 4/3, and it says this spell costs blue less to cast for each instant and sorcery you've cast this turn. Okay? Whenever it attacks, exile up to 1 target instant or sorcery from your graveyard, copy it, you may cast the copy. And you may cast Demi-Lich from your graveyard by exiling 4 instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard in addition to paying its other costs.
This thing loves spells. If you're building this deck very spell heavy, I think this is worth a look at least.
It's going to be cheap, and you can cast it from your graveyard if you have extra spells, and it'll draw you a card when you cast it.
Definitely.
If you're building around Flashback, of course you have to include Quiet Speculation, which is basically puts 3 cards with Flashback into your graveyard right away.
Neat.
Now, those are all ways to cast things from the graveyard, but your commander also cares about you activating things from the graveyard. Yes. So we're going to talk about those abilities as well. This is like Encore, Unearth, Eternalize, even Embalm are all activated abilities that work from your graveyard.
Yeah, or just non-named ones like Scavenged Brawler. You can pay 5, exile it from your graveyard, and you can put 1/1 counters on things, flying counters, vigilance counters, trample counter, lifelink counter, all on one of your creatures. Make one of your creatures huge and cool. Maybe your commander.
Probably your commander. Yeah. And 4 counters on it. It does give it vigilance, so you're going to have to find a way to tap her. But giving her +4/+4 and flying and trample is going to go a long way into making your merfolk scary.
Yeah, the vigilance is a little bit awkward.
A little awkward. A little awkward. One I wanted to mention was Mist Dancer.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is a merfolk wizard. It says other merfolk you control get +1/+0 and have flying. And it has Encore for 7. So this will give your commander +3/+0 and flying if you cast it from their graveyard because you have 3 copies of Mist Dancer.
That's so funny.
Yeah, on flavor. On flavor.
Totally on flavor.
Finally, it is a home for this card, maybe? Maybe? Is it time?
Startled Awake. I've always wanted to do something with this card, too. 2 blue sorcery. Target opponent puts the top 13 cards of their library into their graveyard. You can pay 3 blue, put Startled Awake from your graveyard onto the battlefield transformed. And the transformed version is a 1/1 with Skulk. This creature can't be blocked by creatures with greater power, and when it deals combat damage to a player, return it to its owner's hand. So it just
you can
keeps
keep
coming
milling
back.
your opponents, and you can discard it to pay all of these jumpstart costs that we're talking about, and put it back and cast it again. There's a lot of different ways that you can use this card in your engine, and it gives you sort of a payoff. Like eventually. If you mill 26 cards from your opponent's library, your commander's big enough. Now you're starting to take big chunks out of your opponent's decks. And you might beat them by eliminating all the cards in their library.
Yeah, because if you didn't know, once there's no cards left in your opponent's deck, once they go to draw a card and they have no cards left in their deck, they lose the game. So that's another fun way to do things.
I was looking for an activated ability that you could activate repeatedly from your graveyard. And there aren't a lot. But there are a few that you can probably make work. The best one among them is Drownyard Temple, which is a land that has an activated ability that's 3: return Drownyard Temple from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped.
Mm-hmm. Now, one fun thing that you can do with this is you can activate that ability. The way that the stack works is you can activate that ability. Then before the effect has happened, you can activate that ability again. And then you can activate that ability again. And do that as many times as you would like before the ability resolves. And that lets you draw cards from your commander. Now, granted, it is 3 mana per card. So how realistic is this that it's going to be that helpful? Maybe not. But
is it instant speed, though? Exactly. If you're holding up counter spells and you don't have to use it, you could activate Drownyard Temple to draw an additional card. And it just sits in your graveyard after you've milled it. So.
Yeah, if you're milling yourself anyway, I think Drownyard Temple is definitely worth an include, though.
Mm-hmm. There are cards that allow you to cast cards from the graveyard even if they don't have flashback, like Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, or Gale, Waterdeep Prodigy. Those are all going to be very powerful. Or there's single-use cards like this, like Snapcaster Mage.
A classic. Gives one thing flashback.
Gives one thing flashback.
When it enters, yeah.
Pretty helpful.
You can do something like Emery. Lets you cast your artifact cards from your graveyard and just self-mills yourself a little bit more. Presumably, you're going to have some artifacts. You're going to have some mana rocks, whatever it might be.
The coolest thing about this deck, in my opinion, is you get to play River Kelpie.
Woohoo!
3 blue for a beast. Whenever a River Kelpie or another permanent enters the battlefield from a graveyard, draw a card. Or whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, draw a card.
Well, your commander wants you to be doing that. So thanks, River Kelpie.
Perfect. River Kelpie's great. There's a similar ability called Secrets of the Dead, are all good as well.
Love it.
If you want to make your commander even bigger, let's do a little proliferating.
Yeah. So you can do something like Flux Channeler, which is whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Proliferate. Now, Proliferate means choose any number of permanents and or players, and give another counter of each of the types already there.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of ways to make your commanders really big out of nowhere in blue. You can add equipment and that kind of thing, which we'll talk about in a moment. But blue is good at using your spells to put more counters, which you already have counters naturally. So this really fits the blue play pattern a lot. For flavor reasons, Ripples of Potential is a perfect option. It's Proliferate, then choose any number of permanents you control that had a counter put on them that way, and those permanents phase out. So your commander leaves the game, stays hidden safely in case somebody tries to remove her. She is a big part of your engine, after all.
Yeah. And if you want to, what if we just killed them with the commander? How about that?
That works for me.
Yeah, something like Blackblade Reforged, one of my favorite cards. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Equipped legendary creature 3.
Nice. So that means you're milling yourself for more. That means you're hitting your opponents for more. A couple of equipments that buff your commander a lot are going to go a long way in this deck.
Whoopshaw. One-shot people with your commander again.
We love it. Finally, if you don't want to one-shot people with your commander, that way you're going to need ways to control when she gets tapped. So you can do this by crewing vehicles or by other abilities like Drowner of Secrets. Says tap and untap merfolk you control. Target player puts the top card of his or her library into their graveyard.
Everything that you want in this deck. Relic of Legends, where you can tap and untap legendary creature you control to add a mana of any color. Something like Paradise Mantle.
Or a Springleaf Drum.
Yeah.
All do the same thing, basically, tapping your commander to get you mana. And mill you. A good way to use those is Freed from the Real. You can assemble a tiny combo here.
This is hot.
With Paradise Mantle and Freed from the Real. This is an aura that you put on your commander that says blue : tap enchanted creature or blue : untap enchanted creature. So you can pay a single blue to untap or tap your commander at any time. If it's equipped with a Paradise Mantle, which also gives it the ability tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, now you can tap your commander to add blue, mill yourself, pay the blue to
which
untap,
you made with the Paradise Mantle.
untap it with Freed from the Real, and tap it again for blue. You can mill your whole library. You could mill all your opponent's libraries.
Just mill all your opponent's libraries and then say pass turn, and then they all die when they go to their draw step.
Ta-da!
We've done it. To be fair, Freed from the Real is a type of card that when it comes down, most people will see it and think, oh, this is some kind of combo thing, isn't it? So just be prepared, even if you're not doing the specific combo, that might be something that people think of when they see that.
I do think this deck wants a lot of ways to untap your commander so you can keep tapping her and milling you or your opponents for even more. Shore Up is a double-edged spell that gives target creature hexproof or untaps it, I suppose.
I love all this flavor.
I know. It's so good.
So cool.
Cerulean Wisps untaps a creature and draws a card. Perfect.
Sting, the sword. It's at the beginning of each combat, untap equipped creature. Pretty neat.
And something like Marrow Commerce says at the end of your turn, untap all merfolk you control. Perfect.
Dang, we got so many cool options.
She's a merfolk. Or Manamo School at Water's Edge is a land that untaps target legendary creature. Now you have lots of opportunities to untap your commander, and using all of the abilities that tap your commander, mill yourself more, your engine is going. I think you probably win with either combat damage, by hitting them with a giant merfolk, or by milling their whole library.
Yep, both excellent options. Highly recommend.
Up next, it's my favorite guy. Look at his weird face.
He does have a weird face.
It's Plagon, Lord of the Beach. His job is beach.
I am Plagon, Lord of the Beach.
He is a 2 and a blue for a legendary creature, Starfish Wizard. He's a 0/3. Whenever Plagon enters, draw a card for each creature you control with toughness greater than its power, including himself. And then it says white or blue, : so he's an Azorius commander. You can play both white and blue. Target creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power this turn.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So this deck wants to be full of creatures with higher toughness than their power. And the first place we're going to start is obviously the beach.
Beach. This is a beach episode. You look at that art and you think, yeah, we're doing a beach episode.
We're doing
right
a beach. We're jumping the shark. It's a Scuttle-Tide deck.
I'm sorry, that got me. As you were.
1 and a blue for an enchantment. It says 1, discard a card, create a 0/3 blue crab creature token.
Yeah!
Delirium. Crabs you control get +1/+1 as long as there are 4 or more card types in your graveyard. Yeah!
I guess.
It's for making crabs.
It's for making crabs.
This one made me laugh. Hullbreaker Horror.
It's a 7/8.
Yeah!
So technically toughness
Still
higher
counts.
than power. Yeah.
I like that he's a kraken. He looks like a lobster. And it says whenever you cast a spell, you can either return target spell to its owner's hand or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So you can cast all these sort of cheap, like 1-mana crabs and 1-mana turtles, and every time they enter,
And then
you
just
bounce
return
something.
things to hand. Yeah, that's funny.
It's
like
surf
that a
and
lot.
turf control.
Surf and turf control. Love it.
Speaking of
Keep the
1-mana
puns going.
turtles, is Phantasmal Shield back.
It's a turtle illusion. When it becomes a target of a spell or ability, sacrifice it. And when it dies, draw a card. But it's a 1/3. It's a 1/3.
Counts. You can find frogs at the beach, right?
Yes.
Depends on the beach.
What about like Polywog Prodigy? You can find those. Yeah.
He's very good.
Ocean related. It's a little bit farther up in not rivers, ponds. I was going to say river, but
Yeah.
I guess it's more pond.
It's fine. Yes, there's rivers and
Yeah.
beaches. It
Rivers
says,
still out on some
whenever
beaches.
an opponent casts a non-creature spell with mana value less than Polywog Prodigy's power, draw a card. And it also has Evolve. So if you cast things with higher power or more likely toughness, you get counters on this frog. He gets bigger. He draws you more cards. Speaking of frogs, it says whenever one or more other creatures you control leave the battlefield without dying, draw a card. Nice. Dowerport Mage.
Probably should have started with that.
Is. Yeah, that's his name. Dowerport Mage. And then you can pay 1 and a blue and return another target creature you control to its owner's hand. Well, your commander has a very powerful enter the battlefield ability.
That's not true. I don't think that's true, Richard.
I think it is. He's the Lord of the Beach after all. So you can return your commander to your hand and recast him to draw cards for all of your little turtles and frogs and crabs
Dang, that's very powerful.
on the beach.
I love that.
There's a lot of really dumb cards that I could mention and spend a lot of time talking about, but Wall of Kelp is one that I refuse not to mention. It's a blue for a wall. It has an activated ability that says blue tap, put a Kelp token into play. It's a 0/1 wall, and it's a 0/3. So Wall of Kelp makes you like little guys that draw you cards with your commander, and
Keep
it's
in mind,
flavorful.
these are walls.
Yeah.
Which means that they have been eroded to now have defender, meaning that they cannot attack.
Yes.
So
They don't really work with that second ability.
Yeah, so keep that in mind. Whenever you're building this deck, if you see something that says wall and it's old and doesn't say that it can't attack, all walls have basically been eroded to they have defender, cannot attack. Sorry.
Okay. One more beach creature.
Fine.
Mesmerizing Benthid is an octopus.
I oftentimes find Benthids at the beach.
It's a beach. It's a beach
Benthids at the
Benthid.
beach is going to be in my fantasy football team name.
We are silly today.
No.
It is a 4/5 octopus. When it enters, you make 2/0/2 blue illusion creature tokens with whenever this creature blocks, that creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. And it has hexproof as long as you control an illusion. So this is 3 creatures with higher toughness than their power when it enters the battlefield.
Absolutely beautiful.
Plus, your commander has a strong ETB, so anytime you have other strong ETBs on your creatures, that means that you can make them enter the battlefield again. It's really good with the Dowerport Mage that can return it to the hand, replay it, give you even more illusions, even more cards off of your Lord of the Beach.
Yeah, ETB shorthand for enters the battlefield.
Yes, thank you. And, all right.
Enough clowning around.
You should probably play some real stuff that you
Let's play
can't
real
really
cards.
find at the beach like a vampire, but...
So there are actually like some legitimately good cards that have higher toughness than power, kind of like the Hullbreaker Horror that we were talking about earlier. That can fit nicely in this deck. Like a Welcoming Vampire, whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once per turn. That being said, this is still a good card that tons of decks play, and I think it's going to be great in this. Keeps you drawing cards. Love it.
Yep. The higher toughness and the additional card draw is exactly where this deck wants to be. Now, I mentioned that enters the battlefield abilities are very strong in this deck, so you're going to want ways to exile them and return them to the battlefield. We call it blinking. So Restoration Angel is one of my favorites in this deck because it's a 3/4 angel with flash when it enters.
It has toughness higher than power.
It does. And it blinks your commander, and then it draws you an additional card when it comes back in.
Perfect.
So that's exactly the kind of thing that I think you want this deck to be doing.
Throw like a Wall of Omens in there. It's a 0/4 when it enters, draw a card.
Perfect.
Those types of cards I think will like
Good for blinking.
fill it out quite nicely.
Good for drawing cards.
Yeah.
Springjack Shepherd is busted in this deck.
Classic question mark. This is a 1/2 with Chroma. When it comes into play, put a 0/1 white goat creature token into play for each white mana symbol and the mana cost of permanents you control. So it's like old Devotion.
Yeah. So if you have a couple of white cards in the battlefield, like your Welcoming Vampire, your Wall of Omens, this enters and makes multiple goat tokens. It's a great thing for you to blink, and it is a good thing for you to blink your commander after you play this, because it's a bunch of creatures with higher toughness than power in a box.
Yep. And they can all attack. technically.
They're not defender.
They're not defenders.
Those goats can attack.
Woo.
There's a lot of ways to make tokens that have higher toughness than power. Genku Future Shaper does it. There's a new card, Murmuration, that I think is quite good in this deck. It makes bird tokens for each spell you've cast this turn. Notably, they're storm crows, so they're 1/2s.
Beautiful.
They're not seagulls, but you can pretend. You can pretend they're seagulls if you want.
No, they're storm crows. Gotta be storm crows.
All right, so this deck definitely cares about toughness. So you want a way to be able to close out this game using your creature's high toughness. Now, your commander helps you with that. It has an ability that gives them the we call it butt fighting. It's where they deal damage equal to their toughness rather than their power, but you're going to want other ways to do that so you don't have to keep paying the mana over and over for each creature.
Yeah, something like Baldin Century Herdmaster. It's a 0/7. Very cool. As long as it's your turn, each creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power.
Nice.
Pairs nicely with the 0/1 goats that we're potentially making a ton of.
Yeah. Think of all the goats. And he's a herdmaster.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We've made a combo.
Whenever Baldin attacks up to 100 target creatures, each get +0/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand.
I forgot about that. Also, quite relevant.
Yeah. That's the other half of Baldin. He's a herdmaster for a reason, so he'll buff up all your goats to epic proportions, and you can deal some real damage.
Yeah, you can throw some in like High Alert. Each creature deals combat damage assigned to its toughness instead of its power. But this also makes it so your defender, so your Wall of Kelps can attack.
Nice.
Great, love that.
Helpful. Tetsuko Umizawa Fugitive says creatures you control with power or toughness, 1 or less, can't be blocked. So this
Probably
is for
power.
your 0/3s, your 1/3s, your 0/1 goats. No blocking.
We've made us a combo.
It's a combo. Your goats are now ninjas. Congratulations. And you got to throw in Rasad In Bashir as well. It lets your creatures assign combat damage equal to their toughness rather than their power. And when he attacks, if you have the initiative, double the toughness of each creature you control until end of turn.
Cool.
And he's a 0/3 himself. So play some initiative creatures. Pretty sweet. All right, we mentioned Blink is going to be good in this deck. We're going to take a moment to talk about some of the best ways to do so. So you're drawing the most cards with your Lord of the Beach.
Play Ephemerate.
Yeah.
If you are playing a Blink deck where you're exiling creatures and returning them, Ephemerate is a great one because it does that for 1 mana at instant speed, and it has Rebound, which means that you exile it as it resolves, and then you cast it for free at the beginning of your next upkeep. So it's a 2-for-1.
Yep.
You can do it twice for 1 mana at instant speed.
A little bit more mana, but still twice is Momentary Blink. It's 2 mana for an instant, and then it's 3 and a blue to flash back.
Or if you want to do it over and over, you can do something like Teleportation Circle, where at the beginning of your end step, you may exile a creature or artifact and then bring it back to the battlefield.
Or more flavorfully, Thassa Deep Dwelling.
Actually, I like that one. Let's do Thassa.
A perfect one is Riptide Laboratory.
Ooh.
Laboratory. 1 and a blue. Return target wizard you control to its owner's hand.
Perfect.
He's a starfish wizard.
He is a starfish wizard.
And it's the Riptide Laboratory.
It is! All these realizations are just like hitting me.
I thought a lot
Like
about
a
the
wave.
Lord of a Beach. All right.
We're terrible.
Oh my God. Sanctum of Eternity does a similar thing and is going to be very good with Plagon. He's awesome. I'm obsessed. I really want to build the sea creature version of this deck
I love
because
the
it also
art.
seeve really, really powerful.
Yeah, it does seem good. It's like kind of jokey, but also like pretty good.
Yeah. All right. No more beach puns. We're on to Rev Tithe Extractor.
I promise. Can we make beach puns with Rev?
We can try if you'd like.
Thanks.
3 and a black for a legendary creature, Human Rogue. Whenever you attack, target creature gains Death Touch until end of turn. Then, whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. Then look at the top card of that player's library and exile it face down. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. So this is kind of similar to the first commander that we talked about today with all the snakes.
Death Touch.
Where you're trying to deal combat damage to all of your opponents. And it's also very similar to Grim Hireling, which makes the 2 treasure tokens when you connect.
Let's just put Grim Hireling in this deck.
We definitely should.
First include Grim Hireling.
Grim Hireling, definitely. But it also lets you steal cards off of your opponent's libraries, and gives you the treasure to be able to cast them in case they're playing, some color other than black, which seems likely.
That is a very important thing to note because some of these effects will say that you can spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast those spells. This does not say that.
Nope.
So you need to use those treasures or any potential other things that you have that generate mana of any color in your deck in order to be able to cast those. Also, it does say cast, it doesn't say play, meaning you cannot play lands. You have to cast spells from this.
First thing that you need in a deck like this is creatures that can deal combat damage to your opponents reliably. So I would play a lot of 1 and 2 mana creatures that can't be blocked or have flying or have shadow. That way that you're guaranteeing as many treasures as possible from your commander when they connect. Changeling Outcast is one that we've already mentioned. Tormented Soul is sort of similar.
Yep. 1 mana 1/1s, they will get through damage for sure.
Yep. Bitter Blossom makes you lots of fairies, so you can connect with multiple players, get 3 treasures.
Quite reliable.
Nether Trader is one I wanted to mention. It's a 2 mana 1/1 with haste and shadow, so it can only be blocked by other creatures with shadow, which is unlikely. It's mostly unblockable.
Yep.
Then it says whenever another creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay a black. If you do, return Nether Trader from your graveyard to the battlefield. So whenever your creatures die, like in a board wipe, you can always have Nether Trader return to the battlefield, and you always have a creature to start making more treasures with your commander.
Pretty neat.
And stealing cards.
I love stealing cards.
We did.
We're just looking at the list of cards, and it's
they're
like
all
Grim
very
Hireling
similar.
Again.
Gix Yawgmoth Praetor is one we have mentioned already. I did want to move on to the next section. I do think because you don't have the ability to cast these spells with any colored mana, you do want to have a lot of treasure producers in the deck. You definitely want Grim Hireling. You want even something like Horde Robber. It's whenever it attacks, you make a treasure token. Deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. Your commander has the ability to give it Death Touch.
Yes.
So it gives it a little bit of evasion, makes it inconvenient to block, and gives you more treasures so you can cast your opponent's things.
People are likely not going to block a common 1/1.
Probably not.
Just realistically speaking.
It's a 1/3, but
1/3, excuse me.
Goldvein Pick is nice. It's whenever you deal combat damage to a player, you make a treasure, and that is an equipment you can put on any creature. Or a classic black card that goes in a lot of decks like this is Black Market Connections.
Yep. Make a treasure, make a 3/2 that you can attack people with, and draw more cards. Do them all at once. Plunge that life total into the dirt. Mm-hmm. Or don't, just pick one. It doesn't have to be all of them.
We heard you like stealing. Would you like to steal more? Tiny Bones, the Pickpocket, is great in this deck. A single black for a skeleton rogue with Death Touch. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target non-land permanent card from that player's graveyard, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell.
So this one, you do not need those treasures in order to do so. You can just spend mana or mana of any type. Similarly with Gaunty, this is a classic. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library, exile one of them face down, and you can cast that for as long as it remains exiled, spend mana or mana of any type.
I wanted to mention Predator's Hour because I haven't found a deck that is great for this card. And finally, it seems right. It's 1 and a black for a sorcery. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain Menace. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library face down. You may look at it and play that card for as long as it remains exiled. And you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell.
Yeah.
You can see how you're going to need 2 piles of cards. One pile that allows you to use mana of any color, and one pile that doesn't allow you to use mana of any color to cast it.
Just keep an eye on that line of text or lack thereof.
But this basically doubles your commander's ability. So it says if you're stealing, steal more.
Yeah, and it gives things menace, which means that if your thing has Death Touch, then they got to block 2 things.
They're not doing that.
They're not going to do that.
There's been a lot of decks that are sort of built around this theft theme lately, especially after Thunder Junction. So there's a lot of cards that sort of go along with it. One that I definitely have to mention is Thieving Varmint.
Creature type Varmint. I love it.
The 2 mana Death Toucher Lifelinker with a tap ability that says pay 1 life, add 2 mana of any 1 color. Spend this mana only to cast spells you don't own.
That's
Perfect.
super neat.
Yeah.
I love that.
2 mana Mana Dork that is a Death Toucher to steal you some cards and helps you cast them.
Pretty awesome.
Dream Thief's Bandana also does that. It's an equipment that gives you an additional instance of stealing cards. The one thing that I wanted to mention before we move off of Rev is when you're stealing your opponent's cards, it's very likely that the cards that they have don't work as well for your deck as yours do. So you kind of want to have either a lot of them, steal a lot of cards and only use specific ones that work well for you, or you want some sort of selection. So I like putting a Lantern of Insight in this deck that says each player plays with the top card of his or her library revealed.
Yeah, so that gives you the information on, do I even care about dealing combat damage to them?
Should I spend resources attacking this player, or is the card on top of their library better for me to steal?
Yeah, you can also snipe something that you're like, oh, well, this probably isn't going to be good for me, but I really don't want them to have it, so you just go ahead and attack them and get it out of there anyway.
A little information goes a long way in this deck.
A lot of information goes a really long way.
That's true, an extra long way.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of cards that do this type of effect. It'd be cool if there were more.
Yeah.
Please, Wizards, please print more.
Are you asking for more lanterns?
Actually, no. Now that I think about it, no more lanterns. I take it back.
Up next is the very first card of his creature type to ever be printed.
Yes, this is Sir Shroofus Sproutsire.
He's the first Saproling.
Yeah, 2 and a green, legendary creature Saproling. Got trample. Whenever a Saproling you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens, and he's a 1/1. So this kind of blew my mind when you came to me and was like, hey, did you know there's no other creatures that have the Saproling creature type? I'm like, no, that's not true.
None.
There's none other than this guy.
They have only been a token type until Shroofus.
Yeah,
this is
crazy.
the first actual Saproling card. Everything else that has made Saprolings is usually fungi.
Mm-hmm.
So he's finally the leader of his own destiny, and I love that we're making Saprolings and we're not planning to kill them, right?
Yes.
Right? We're keeping them because
We're
they're
gonna keep
cute.
them.
Look at their little
We're gonna
cute
attack with them.
faces.
But it does give it a very interesting challenge because this is a Saproling typal deck, and yet you don't have any other creatures. So automatically, given the ability that it has, and given that fact, this is going to be a token deck.
This is a mono green Saproling token deck.
Yes.
You're trying to make as many Saprolings as possible, and if you make them bigger, when they hit, you make even more Saprolings, and then those are bigger, and when they hit, you make even more Saprolings. They're kind of tend to grow.
Yeah.
Like many fungi.
Yeah.
So the first step in this equation is make some Saprolings.
Yeah. So some great ones are Tendershoot Dryad. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. Each upkeep, not just your upkeep, important to note. And it has Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the city's blessing for the rest of the game. And Saprolings you control get +2/+2 as long as you have the city's blessing. And that buff is very important because the bigger your Saprolings are, the more new Saprolings you're going to pump out. So this ability is kind of like Old Gnawbone, is how it's worded. So like
The Shroofus ability is like Old Gnawbone, yeah.
So like with Old Gnawbone, if you attack with just Old Gnawbone and hit for 7, you're going to make 7 treasures. So with Shroofus, if you attack and it is a 3/3 Saproling, you're going to make 3 1/1 Saprolings.
Pretty good. Bright Cap Badger is perfect for this deck. He is an adventurer that's 2 and a green. Fungus Frolic. It's an instant that makes 2 Saprolings. And then it says each fungus and Saproling you control has tap, add green. That's very powerful. And at the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token.
This does everything the deck wants.
It makes Saprolings early. It turns them into mana. It makes even more Saprolings, which is all we want in the world is more Saprolings.
Fun new card.
I know. Bloomburrow, right?
Yeah, seriously. Sprout Swarm. Pretty neat. 1 and a green with Convoke. So you can use your creatures basically to tap for mana in order to cast this. You put a 1/1 green Saproling creature token into play, but it has buyback for 3. So you can pay an additional 3 mana to buy that back.
Put it back in your hand, be able to cast it again.
Yep.
The most common ways to make Saproling tokens on creatures is with a series of cards that are usually called Thalids. And Spore Sower Thalid is going to give you an idea of what I mean. It's 2 green for a creature fungus. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a spore counter on each fungus you control. Then it has an ability that says remove 3 spore counters from Spore Sower Thalid, make a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. So you get a counter on your upkeep, and this one puts it on all your fungus, which is awesome. And then you remove those counters, and you get Saprolings. Now there's dozens. No, there's a lot. There's not.
There's like 5 or 6.
There's
I feel like we've
there's a
done
little
this
more than
before.
that.
Yeah.
Of cards that have this similar line of text. The remove 3 spore counters, make a 1/1, and at their upkeep, they get a counter. So Utopia Mycon and Thallid are going to be the best 2 because they're like 1 mana. And then, of course, your Spore Sower Thallid, which puts it on all of your fungi.
Is that why they're called Thallids? Because of the card Thallid?
Yeah.
That would make sense.
Yeah, that
Magic
would be,
players are so uncreative.
That would be
things.
the OG. That would be the I don't know if it's the first Thallid, but it is the
Thallid.
The Thallid. The
Yeah.
Earth
It's like
Thallid.
the first sliver. The first
exactly.
Thallid.
So I wanted to include some like proliferate effects to really speed up the clock on these spore counters, because that's such a cool, fun way to make saprolings, especially in mono green. An evolution stage is sort of the best. It's landfall. Whenever a land comes into play, you proliferate. So you put an additional, what are they called, spore counter on each of your fungi.
Yeah, I personally like something like Kinkerbloom, where you can sacrifice it to destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or proliferate, because say, like, it is very likely that you don't have one of these Thallids in play. Like, this is kind of like a subset of cards that are in your deck, right? So having that flexibility to blow something up if you need to, or if you do happen to have one of these Thallids, be able to proliferate and enable your own engine. I really like that flexibility.
For sure. It goes a long way. Now, you have all these saprolings. What are we going to do with them?
Not anything. Leave them be.
Leave them alone. But
They're so cute.
if you were going to sacrifice them, put them in a burial plot with their family. Fungal plots is 1 and a green for an enchantment that lets you make saprolings, but more likely sacrifice 2 saprolings. You gain 2 life and draw a card. It's an activated ability you can activate many, many, many times.
Super cool.
Very powerful.
Yeah, I love card draw. That is like tied to the token stuff. So like Idol of Oblivion, tap to draw a card, activate only if you made a token this turn. Probably gonna be doing that every turn, ideally.
One I liked a lot in this deck that you wouldn't really think of is Peregrine Took. It's 2 and a green for a halfling citizen. It says, if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus an additional food token are created instead. And then he says, sacrifice 3 foods, draw a card. Every single time a saproling connects, so if you hit with 4 saprolings, those are 4 instances of making tokens. So you make saprolings and a food, saprolings and a food, saprolings and a food, saprolings and a food.
Yeah.
Now you can sacrifice those 3 foods and draw a card.
Yeah, who cares if you actually use them for the life? You can draw
Sometimes you
cards off
will.
of them.
Yeah, life gain is important in Commander games, especially lately, because sometimes you're almost dead and you need a way to dig out of it.
Yep.
But most of the time, you'll just sacrifice those foods and draw.
Definitely a lot of good value for that. Or what if instead of sacrificing these things, these poor things, we use the saprolings for mana with like Jaheira, Friend of the Forest. Tokens you control have tap, add a green. Great.
Perfect. Or Growing Rights of Itlamok, which has a little like saproling kind of art now from Ixalan. It's a 3 mana enchantment. When it enters, you get to find a creature in the top 4 cards of your library. But if you control 4 or more creatures, you transform it. Hopefully, you'll control way more than 4 creatures. And it flips into a land that taps to add green for each creature you control. That's a lot of green.
Yeah, it's just like the Circle of Dreams Druid that we mentioned earlier with the elves. It taps for a green for each creature you control. Ideally, you want lots of creatures.
Now, these saprolings are small, and they don't really have abilities.
Yeah.
So we need ways for them to actually deal damage.
You can attack
to
with
your
the 1/1s,
opponents.
but it would be nice to buff these things. So a really fun one is Ruxa, Patient Professor. Notably, creatures you control with no abilities get +1/+1.
Great.
And you may have creatures you control with no abilities assign their combat damage as though they weren't blocked.
Aha!
Very cool.
Now, when your saprolings connect, they'll deal 2 damage, no matter if they're blocked or not.
Neat.
And you'll make 2 new saprolings.
It just lets you like attack with saprolings pretty willy-nilly. Like it doesn't really matter if they die. You can just like, all right, swing with all my saprolings. If they get through, great, you make more. If they don't get through, great, they die, you make more. Cool.
But save them. They're nice.
Save them, please.
A great evasive tool is Champion of Lamholt. So whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lamholt. And then creatures with power less than Champion of Lamholt's power can't block creatures you control.
Super neat.
That's what you want.
Yep.
Once Champion of Lamholt's power gets big enough from making all those saprolings, you will be able to attack with an unblockable horde of saprolings, which is likely how you're going to win the game. It's not necessarily a great saproling engine.
Yeah. Another great one, similar to the Ruxa, is Murgonda Petroglyphs. It's an enchantment with creatures with no abilities get +2/+2. Your saprolings have no built-in abilities. Sad. But now they're 3/3s because they have no built-in abilities. Awesome. Happy.
I like Vigor in this deck.
You just like Vigor in green decks, Rachel.
I do.
Surprise, surprise.
I do. It's if damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage. Put a +1 counter on that creature for each 1 damage prevented this way. So you're attacking with a whole bunch of 1/1s. It's very easy for your opponent to block them down. But Vigor now says if you block them, they'll get bigger.
Yep. And then next time you're going to have to block them again, but your creatures might start dying.
And if you don't block them, I'm making Saprolings, and it just puts them in a lose-lose position.
Yeah, it makes your board grow bigger no matter what.
Finally, I wanted to talk about Propagator Drone, because I think this is kind of an interesting spot for it. It says creature tokens you control have evolve. What that means is all of your creature tokens gain the ability evolve. So when a creature that is bigger than them enters the battlefield, they will all get a +1/+1 counter. It's a bit of a non-bow with your Murgonda Petroglyphs and Ruxa, but it does make them all bigger fast.
Yeah, I think you still probably want them in the deck, but if one of them's out, then you probably don't play the other one.
Yeah. All right. Very cool deck. Shroofus, excellent first Saproling.
Yep, you get an A+ as far as the first Saproling creature in all of Magic the Gathering.
You make him proud.
Thanks.
One more card to talk about today, and we had to talk about it because I decide what we talk about. It's Thurid, Mare of Destiny.
Yep.
2 white for a Pegasus. She is flying in lifelink. She's a 2/4. Whenever you cast a Pegasus, a unicorn, or a horse creature spell, copy it. Other Pegasi, unicorns, and horses you control get +1/+1.
Typical. It's a mono white card. Rachel loves white.
And it makes ponies!
Which Rachel also loves.
Yes! So
I feel like
have
Rachel's going to make one of these decks.
I have a pony deck already, and it
Okay.
has all 5 colors in it. But
just
this
gonna
one
put this in.
is way more powerful than mine.
Yes.
So this is a little bit more limited because you can't play every horse under the sun, and I know that is sad to you. But most of them are white, so it's going to be okay. So you're trying to ramp into your commander as fast as possible, get your 4-mana commander on play on turn 3, and then you're going to cast a lot of horses.
But you can't play Shadowfax. Shadowfax has red.
I know.
That's so sad.
Well,
Yeah, the horses.
not of the white horses.
Okay.
So whenever you cast them, you get twice as many. So you obviously want to put in the unicorns, the Pegasi, and the horses that have abilities. There's not as many as you think.
But we're going to talk about
Loyal Unicorn is a very powerful one. It has a lieutenant. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, prevent all damage that would be dealt to creatures you control this turn. Other creatures you control gain vigilance until end of turn. This lets you attack with all of your horses and not all the king's men, because this is a horse deck.
Yes. Ideally, no men in this, only horses.
Freely, because they have vigilance, so they can still block for you, and you prevent all damage that's dealt to them. So you can swing with all of your many horses that you've made, and they'll deal damage, and you can still defend yourself.
Yeah, neat. And extra copies don't really do anything, but that's awesome.
Still, more horse, more good.
Yeah.
Ranam Unicorn is great. It says sacrifice it, destroy target enchantment.
Now
But
that's a great one to have multiple copies of, because then you can just kind of figure out what's on the battlefield that you don't want and just kind of pick it off.
Opaline Unicorn is a 3-mana artifact unicorn that says add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool.
Actually pretty good to have multiples of, yeah.
3
Love
mana
that.
to have 2 mana dorks. That's
Now,
perfect.
This next one we want multiple copies of.
Yes.
Crested Sunmare, 3 white for a horse. Other horses you control have indestructible. At the beginning of each end step, if you gain life this turn, create a 5/5 white horse creature token.
Sick.
Ooh.
Now, your commander has lifelink, so we can help with that.
Yeah. Great. We can do that.
So if you cast Crested Sunmare after your commander, you get 2 Crested Sunmares. You attack with your commander, gain 4 life, and your 2 new Crested Sunmares are like, what? I'll make you 2 horses.
Yeah, Crested Sunmare is one that's in even just life gain decks, like kind of gets out of control pretty fast. Like it can just start snowballing. But 2 Crested Sunmares is even better because they protect each other. Because it says other horses you control have indestructible. Well, it's a horse itself.
That's a horse,
So
of
one
course.
horse looks at the other horse and says, "You're indestructible."
No,
And then that
you're
horse
indestructible.
Looks at the other one and says, "You're indestructible."
It's very cute.
So it really needs like a Swords of Plowshares or like an Exile type of effect in order to even interrupt this. And then even so, you're just getting rid of 1.
Pegasi are the next category of horse that your commander cares about. They don't have a lot of great abilities.
They're
I'll be
mostly
honest.
bad.
The best one is Starnheim Courser. It's 2 and a white for a Pegasus with flying. It says artifact and enchantment spells cost 1 less to cast. Pretty good.
Great. I guess.
We'll take it. That's an ability.
If
that
you can
counts.
copy it, you can play like an Arcane Signet for free.
That's just value.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Sungrace Pegasus is one that I brought up because it is a Pegasus with flying and lifelink. So this lifelink is so important because the most powerful engine you have is stuff like Crested Sunmare.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a bunch of ways to gain life, if they remove your commander, which makes sense, she's kind of scary, you want additional ways to keep triggering that Crested Sunmare.
Yeah, that is one thing about a deck like this is that because most of the horses and Pegasuses are just not that good, your commander is going to be prime removal target. Because if they're going to remove anything, it's going to be that.
Yeah, trust me. If you have one good thing, they will take it from you. But I wanted to talk about the Pegasus side of things because they're sort of the best type of the three. There aren't a ton of good horses. There's Crested Sunmare. That's basically it. There aren't a ton of good unicorns. There's like, we talked about Loyal Unicorn. We even talked about Rana
We
Unicorn.
kind of exhausted the well of good cards
I've told you the good ones. But there's a ton of 2-mana flying Pegasi.
Okay.
So it sort of turns this deck into like a Flying Men style deck where you have a lot of creatures with flying that can chip in for damage, that can wear swords, that can trigger combat damage or attack triggers. That's where your primary engine is going to be in this deck, is running a lot of Pegasus and having a lot of flyers.
Okay.
That's how ponies win games. And I have won games with them. I have.
You've won like one game.
I've won a few.
You've won more than one?
Yeah.
You won one against me. I only know that one.
Yeah. Murph lost to ponies.
Yeah, it was sad.
It doesn't look like a pony, but Roaming Throne is a pony.
It's a pony in a giant mech suit. I'm just going to
This is
fanfic that.
Roaming Throne's a little weird because it only enters the battlefield as a pony. Mm-hmm. It won't be copied by your commander because that cares about when you cast it.
Yes.
So it looks at it and it's like, that thing's not a pony. And then it shows up and it says, a pony.
Yeah.
But it doubles the triggered abilities of other creatures you control that share a type with it. This one's likely going to be Pegasus because it doubles your commander's triggered abilities.
Which is what you want. Because again, there's just not that many other abilities that you even want.
If you have Crested Sunmare, maybe you think about horse, but most of the time it's going to be Pegasus in this deck. Oh, I wanted to mention that you look at this and you're like, it's a typal deck, so I'll put in typal things like Roaming Throne or Vanquisher's Banner. But it is a little tricky because you're splitting it between 3 different creature types.
It's kind of awkward because like with a Vanquisher's Banner, what do you choose?
Probably Pegasus, just because that's sort of what you're going to play the most of. But it's only going to draw off of like 15% of your deck, which just really isn't enough to run it.
Exactly.
And it at least it triggers off your commander. So you really stay away from traditional typal stuff in this deck and focus more on creatures you control that have flying or just more sort of open-ended creature benefits rather than like specific typal cards. Mm-hmm. Up next, we're going to talk about tokens because you're making token copies of spells you're casting.
Yes.
Populate effects are very good because you're copying a card. So populate effects become as good as a whole new card.
Yeah. One important thing to note with this is that whenever you are doing that initial like cast and you create a copy of whatever's cast, that copy becomes a token. You are not creating a token. So anything that says that whenever you create a token, create twice that many tokens instead will not work with the commander's ability. So probably best to keep those away unless you're going super heavy on the token theme.
Yeah, I think the first thing that you think is like, I put in an Anointed Procession and now I have 3 Crested Sunmares, but it doesn't work because you're not creating a token. A spell is becoming a token. And I know that sounds dumb. It's because it
That's the way Magic works, unfortunately.
but that's how it works.
I definitely messed this up the first time.
So populate effects become much better because that's the way that you can make more token copies of this. So Rootbound Defenses says populate creatures you control become indestructible until end of turn, or like Nesting Dovehawk will let you populate every combat. Yeah. Really, really nice. One more category before we go is we're going to talk about life gain. Because this deck has one plan and it's sort of get a Crested Sunmare in play or buff all of your flyers.
This is a Crested Sunmare deck and it has no other plan.
You do. I wish that card was legendary.
That'd be pretty cool.
You do want some amount of other life gain effects in the deck. There's like a couple of horses with flying, and there's like Diamond Mare that says when you cast a spell of a chosen color, you gain 1 life. And that's okay.
Sure, I guess.
But you really want effects that you can gain life on other players' turns because Crested Sunmare triggers on other players' turns as well. So you probably run Soul Wardens or Authority of the Consuls that say whenever a creature enters, you gain 1 life. Now you're Crested Sunmare, you're Super Horse. When you have it, you're cooking.
Nice.
The other thing I wanted to mention was ARCHIDEKT. Whenever you have a white commander that has great keywords like flying and lifelink in particular, I think ARCHIDEKT is worth looking at.
Yeah.
Because he says at the beginning of combat, creatures you control gain all of the keywords of all of the creatures you have on the battlefield. So flying and lifelink are really, really powerful keywords, and the horses sort of only have keywords. So if you can split that between all the ponies, ARCHIDEKT will be a good stable master to you.
Yeah. I think this deck does like struggle a little bit with closing outs. Maybe like a mirror entity.
Yeah, it's technically a pony, a really weird looking pony.
Looking pony. Moonshaker Cavalry, something like that. So
Yeah,
there's a
some
couple options, but
big pump effects is
Yeah.
definitely something you need to be looking at. Cathar's Crusade has a lot of horses on it.
true. That's flavorful.
So if you're building this deck, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. It's mono white, and you're playing some not very developed creature types, but it's really fun and it's really pretty, and you should do it.
Nice.
Okay. Those are the commanders that we're going to talk about from Foundations. We are officially done now. We've covered the Jumpstart ones. We've covered the main set ones. If you haven't watched that episode with Jimmy, go watch that one. It's a ton of fun.
Because Jimmy's awesome. I love Jimmy.
All right. So before we go, we like to talk about our favorite commanders that we talked about and the one that we think is the most powerful in the set. Let's start with our favorites.
I like Ivora, Insatiable Heir.
That's the mono red discard one.
With blood, tokens, and trample, make something big, just one-shot somebody. Wacha! I just love the amount of like different types of cards that I've always wanted to put in decks that can go in this type of deck. And that's what I always look for when looking at these commanders. Like, what can I do that's new or interesting? Even if it's something that's kind of been done before, is it a new or interesting spin on that?
Yeah.
And I think this definitely fulfills that category for me.
I agree. Mono red discard, pretty sweet. Surprisingly, honestly, there was a couple that I really liked from this episode.
Yeah.
I liked Thurid, Mare of Destiny. Obviously, look at her. I also liked Ivora and was like putting a list together and was like, you have to focus. You have to finish this episode. There's other commanders in it. And then I saw Plagon, Lord of the Beach. And he stole my heart with his weird little jellyfish hat. And I was like, I can put Wall of Kelp in. I'm in. Done.
Perfect. That's all we've ever wanted. Wall of Kelp.
I think he's my favorite. The most powerful commander we agree on, and it's mono green elves.
Yep. Dionus, Elvish, Archdruid.
Yeah.
It's good.
Elves are going to elf, and Dionus makes them elf twice as much.
It has the most powerful shell out of any of these already existing, and it supercharges that already existing shell. So you're going to have a lot of fun with it if you like powerful magic.
Absolutely. Elf players are a devoted type of player, and
For sure.
they are for a reason, because you draw a lot, you make a lot of mana, and Dionus is going to help you do that.
Pretty fun.
To the listeners, what commander do you think is the most powerful in Foundations Jumpstart? Was it Dionus? Was it Thurid? The pony one?
Yeah.
Not a very pony name. A little bit pointy, but
the art is really sick.
the art is sick.
So
It's it's an 8-legged Pegasus because it's Norse. Okay. Are you planning on building any of the commanders that we talked about today? Did we sell you on Ivora?
I sold myself on Ivora.
What are the sweet cards that we missed for the 99? Let us know. And if we didn't talk about the commander that you wanted us to talk about today, I'm very sorry. We covered a lot today, so talk about it in the comments below. Maybe there are other people looking for that commander. If you want to pick up any of the cards that we talked about, go to cardkingdom.com/command. It's a great way to support the show. Tell them that you watch our content and are buying cards because of it. That helps us out a whole lot. Plus, you get a lot back. Card Kingdom has a huge selection of cards, which means you only have to shop in one place. You order cards one time. You know exactly where they're coming from and when they're coming. It just simplifies the whole deck building process, which can be a real nightmare. Plus, you can trust that Card Kingdom knows their stuff. There's a lot of different cards and versions and printings and foilings, and you want somebody who you trust to know exactly what you're looking for, so you don't wind up with an etched foil when you ordered a regular foil and you're like, all the other ones are regular foils and I got this one etched one. Card Kingdom's got your back, and if something goes wrong like that, they've got a great team to take care of you. So support the show, pick up some sweet cards, and do it in a convenient manner over at cardkingdom.com/command.
And also, Ultra Pro products are all amazing. They have great deck boxes, sleeves, playmats, all sorts of cool things. You can find them at your LGS or at ultrapro.com/command. They have deals on there all the time. You can sign up for their newsletter. They'll tell you whenever these flash sales are available. You can get stuff that is tied in with the theme of whatever set is coming out, the Foundation stuff. So I just recommend signing up for that newsletter, or at least go over to ultrapro.com/command. Just do a little bit of scrolling, see what catches your fancy.
Yeah. If you've got a playmat that you're in love with and you don't want to play on it because you don't want to get it dirty or spill, pasta on it or whatever you're eating while you're playing Magic, spaghetti is the first thing I thought of. What is wrong with me today? You can put it in a frame, put it on your wall, remember the good time at the convention that you had, or
Eating spaghetti.
Eating spaghetti at the convention, or just appreciate the art that's on it. They've got a premium playmat wall holder, and it's just 2 pieces of acrylic, keeps it safe, and makes it so you can look at it all the time. It's really cool. Okay, finally, go to our Kickstarter. Pick up this sweet deck box to store all of your new decks. Get a Plagon Lord of the Beach, get Ivora, get Thurid, get I almost called him Shroomish. That's Pokemon. What's his name? Floof. Sure.
I'm really struggling, Rachel.
Shroofish.
Shroofish.
Derpoos. The editors are like, we're editing this, you idiots. His name is Shroofus. I was so close. Put Shroofus right next to your Shroomish deck if you're a dual Pokemon and Magic player.
Or put Shroofus in one, put the tokens for Shroofus in the middle, and then put even more tokens in the other one.
That's true.
You just need that many tokens, ideally.
Before we go, we're going to say thank you to our amazing team here at the Command Zone. Thank you to Eric Lem, Rachel Kendra, Gaurav Galati, Jamie Block, Jordan Pridgeon, Jake Boss, Manson Lung, Christopher Matista, Karina Cruz, Sebastian Salazar, Evan Limburger, Sam Waldo, Josh Lee Kwai, Jimmy Wong, and of course, to Josh Murphy for taking the time to be very, very silly with me today.
Yeah, we
talk about these Jumpstart commanders. Hope you enjoyed. They're still listening. They must have had a wonderful time.
Yeah, thank you for going all the way to the very end when the episode actually ends. You're our favorite.
You rock.
You're awesome. You rock.
Bye.
Dun 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 dun.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.